And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. Oh, what a fantastic crowd we have out there in the ideas room tonight already. Of course, I am joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Miss Olivia, it's like emergency rule, emergency powers everywhere we turn.
Yes, getting used to it.
Especially in France. And soon to be right here in America as well. It's great to have so many of you here with us tonight. This is a special report that we're doing before our big two-part anniversary show next week, which is next Friday. And tonight's special report includes the Trump indictment. It includes the UFO file. It includes emergency powers. It includes plans for a blackout or cyber blackout and all the Russia-Ukraine news. So we've got a lot to fill you in on, including the run for president by RFK Jr. as well. So we have quite a lot to balance out here. We're going to go about 2 hours with you for the special report. And it's great to have so many of you here with us. I mentioned right off the bat about these emergency powers. And, you know, it's a recurring theme on this show is the continuity of government powers, which you're going to find over and over again. You know, this gets raised now. It's like it's in their back pocket. And the continuity of government is a highly unconstitutional action to be taken by any government, but especially in the United States, ruled by the Constitution to try to do things through emergency powers, which is something they've been building up. But they've been using emergency powers in states, especially Democratic governors, taking fascist measures. They used emergency powers in Justin Trudeau's Canada. Hopefully those people will be free on that imprisoned country. And we've been seeing it now in France. It's all the rage. And of course, the Fed announced all these emergency measures for the shaky, wakey bakey. I mean, just unbelievable bank situation. So we've been seeing this go on, and the nature of the emergency powers is insidious because they did the dry run for what I think is the ultimate emergency power, and that is the UFO threat run. So we get into some real trouble with that, especially when we're doing those shoot downs of the balloons in February and then the unidentified flying objects. And we had a person I'd been pointing out for over a couple of years, the Northcom commander, General Van Herk, and suddenly he was front and center and Stepford Biden was nowhere in sight. There's a reason for that, and we're going to get into all of it tonight. I want to remind you that we're going to be taking your questions in the second half of tonight's show, and Miss Olivia is going to be putting those together. I'm going to try to get through all this in the first hour and 15 minutes, and then save the rest of the time block for you. So, Miss Olivia, before I jump in, how's it going?
Everybody's making fun of the road sign.
Well, I love road stuff, but it's interesting because I got this stand because the other one was driving me crazy, but it came with this wonderful road thing. So what I think we're going to do is just put a sign over it that says DJ.
Some duct tape on it.
But yeah, right now I'm a walking advertisement for it. But I have no problem with that because I've used Rode pretty much in most of my professional audio career. Now, I also want to remind you, if you're new to the program, to please go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for our newsletter. It keeps us in the loop with each other, and this is going to be very important, especially with all the extreme censorship that we've been seeing, and we've been right front and center on that, with the incredible suppression of the work that we've been putting out. But the word continues to get out, and to such a degree that, as some examples from our upcoming shows are going to be kind of funny, because a lot of people are hopping on the bandwagon of the subjects that we've been bringing forth for you. And that can only be a good thing, except when it's watered down. And when they water it down, that's usually on a network level, and there's a reason for that. So we're going to get into that as well. But remember, the key word for 2023 is potency. The information that you get has to be potent, high potency. And no surrender is the other one. Those two in combination are going to be kind of a good touchstone this year. Because if we get the kind of watered down version of UFO disclosure or deep state revelations, if it's Tucker Carlson saying, hey, we're going to get UFO disclosure from a couple of CIA guys, it's not going to work out as well. But there's going to be two levels of this. There's going to be the watered down kind of network, Fox network disclosure, and then there's going to be the real thing, and we want to be right there in that center, giving that information to you. No filters, no advertisers, nothing. Here it comes to you. The only other thing I want to mention here is that, when it comes to all the prosecutions around Trump, we're going to be talking about Trump and RFK Jr. tonight. One, a Democrat from an incredible Democrat family, and the other, a Republican who, has been president and really is the leading figure by over 30 points for the Republican primary coming up. And, regardless of how you feel about politics, these two are the key figures. And Stepford Biden, if anything, the goal is to try to concentrate on these two and to get Stepford Biden out of the picture, and anyone else they might throw up. It's kind of a good term. Gavin Newsom was the next line. Throw up Gavin Newsom, everybody. The way that I look at this, though, it gets interesting because my own predictions about elections, and I tend to, after watching them so closely, you never know what's going to happen, actually, but you start to tune into a sense, and the sense is that the collapse for Biden is really, the support for Biden is collapsing heavily, and that Trump's star has been rising, and that the indictments and things were an attempt to throw him off and make him look bad and have the whole perp walk and the arrest and all this kind of stuff. Because when you go into those indictments that are, underway in Manhattan under DA Bragg, this Stormy Daniels hush money from 2016, it's, it seems like one of the dumbest things I've ever heard in my life. But when you look at these cases, they're designed to create that image in viewers' mind that, Trump he's going to prison, he's under legal problems, he can't win. And that's supposed to catapult up Ron DeSantis, who is waiting in the wings. But unfortunately, although he's done a lot of good things there in Florida, what we're finding out about DeSantis is too many of the old Bushy Bush connections in the background, too many of the neocon deep staters hanging out in the back there, promoting him. And probably what they'll end up doing is bringing him up to a level and then wanting the old trade-off that they can get, do we get a Romney or an Obama? And we're back to the old paradigm that led us into endless wars. So unfortunately, I think that DeSantis has more to learn. He's shown some good independent streaks on the COVID op and things of this nature. There's no question about that. But it comes with a price, which is his connections of wanting to run for president and his age at 44. He's pushing it, especially when Trump dominates the field and right now holds a 30-point lead over DeSantis in the polls. That's fairly hard to overcome those numbers unless you've got the deep state working with you to put Trump in jail. On the flip side, you've got an incredibly weak Biden administration, and you have the real possibility of a challenger like an RFK Jr. Taking him out early in the primary process and becoming the nominee. Although if that happens, then I think you're going to see a lot of Democrats jump in. So it's going to be pretty wild 2024. And we need to get on top of it. I have heard a lot of things flying around independent media saying, oh, that presidential election doesn't matter, nothing will change and all the rest. In fact, it's quite significant this year. And in terms of the type of research that we do in this program, it's going to be crucial because, I've often spoken of the body politic. And in America, it's crucial to have the right head for that body politic. So the presidency represents the head of the body politic. And so we need the right head on the right shoulders in this case. So regardless of who that is, we can obviously see it's not Stepford Biden. So the first goal, remove Biden. The next goal, choose between whoever else is there. And, you could see a real free-for-all going on if Biden falls, and you might see, Kamala Harris and crazy people like that vying for the nomination with Gavin Newsom. So, it could get quite bizarre. My feeling is that it depends on the level of disaster in the polls. Like Biden is a real disaster right now, but if he goes to super disaster, then that's going to be different. I'm going to back some of that up by reading some of these polls that are going on. But first, I want to point out these emergency measures that are taking place so that when I talk about them seizing emergency powers, I want to refer to it more as a thing not off in the distance somewhere, but it's happening now. And that becomes oh so crucial. It's great to have so many of you out there in the ideas room. Of course, we just put out last week the Gigi Young interview and really got a great response on that. Gigi doing excellent work. And next week, as I mentioned, a 2-part X Series anniversary special. And you don't want to miss it. Friday and Saturday, 8 p.m., March 31st and April 1st. Ms. Olivia?
Najat Madri wants to know, any bets on a Trump RFK Jr. ticket?
Well, it would be highly desirable. And, in a sense, they're both working to remove Biden. But the idea, there's too many things that are difficult in the nominating and election process for that to take place, although I wouldn't rule out, I'd give it an incredibly low percentage of happening. But there's a lot of reasons to think these guys are going to be working together, and they've expressed a kind of camaraderie in the past on certain issues, even though we've seen that the rhetoric at times, be very Democrat-Republican. All right, exploitable emergency powers, France's cautionary tale for America. There it is. They exercised these powers, and they've done it a couple of times recently, but the latest thing that President Macron has done is he's overrode the legislature. He said, no vote, I'm just going to cut the retirement age back. And what's interesting is, in doing this, it's quite remarkable because he is taking them down, for something they've already paid into, a system they've already paid into. So in the middle of all that, we see France increases military aid to Ukraine. This is what's been going on. So supposedly, if they don't have the money for all these pensions and all the rest, well, what's the nature of the issue? They're giving money to Ukraine. Where's the money for the pensions? Well, oddly enough, America is paying Ukrainians pensions. So the whole system is, upside down at this point. And also, we're looking at another situation in relation to France, which is, you've got over 1 million people there protesting. Macron's government decides to pass budget without vote. That was last October. French President Emmanuel Macron's government says it plans to use a special constitutional authority. There it is, special constitutional authority, emergency power. I mean, that's basically saying you're under a fascist dictatorship. And so when we get to this, it becomes crucial for us to become aware for the telltale signs on this. So that's what they were up to back here. So, when we get to this cautionary tale for America and we're looking at it, what we're experiencing now, the citizens of France are rising up against the executive branch after the president used emergency powers to alter the retirement age without going through the legislative process. That's pure fascism. And this is the nature of what we're looking at. In America, we're looking at Treasury explores emergency powers to expand FDIC coverage amid contagion. Okay, here we go, emergency powers. Are you ready? Well, what was COVID? COVID was a big emergency that we were under as well. So there we were in the middle of all these situations and taking a lot of heat from the COVID people saying we have to lock down this business, close your business, stay home, live under an emergency lockdown. So we've already had a taste of this, and they've already introduced emergency powers as the measure to do it. The formula that I've laid out is that they no longer have the ability to govern, that is, popular vote. They don't have it. So they don't have a electable majority. What they have to do is they have to accomplish a number of things by creating emergencies. And so someone like Macron, he just rolls in there and says, I don't need the legislature because they're not going to pass it. I'll just do it. How undemocratic can you get? This is the nature of what we're talking about. Banks are still drawing on the Fed for $164 billion of emergency cash. Banks are still drawing on the Fed for this emergency money, even after that first dose. So We're into the emergency powers with the banks. We're into it with the French government. We saw the Canadian government do this. We've been living under COVID emergency rules. So it's emergency. But the ultimate, remember, emergency power for governance is the continuity of government program, the COG, and that's the real risk. We get into some of this, and it's why we pay such close attention to issues like the UFO file and this. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is a special report tonight on emergency powers, blackouts, the UFO file, and more. We're going to be getting into indictments as well, the Trump indictment for sure, which is a farce, as we know. And we're going to be taking your questions in this report, where we're going to go a couple hours here. Miss Olivia.
We got a little bit of an audio issue, a little bit of popping and fading. And should we switch mics?
Interesting. No, I think I'll just roll with it and
Okay.
talk away as we go. And we'll just kind of try to work our way into this. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, and you should, in looking at all of these things, Miss Olivia, maybe your mic should be a little bit closer too.
No, I was a little loud, actually. So like I usually am, so I pushed it away.
Okay, here we are and doing our best. All right, last week, Euro-Pacific capital economist Peter Schiff was critical of the Biden administration's decision to ensure all depositors of the collapsed Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, tweeting, bailing out depositors of failed banks is yet another mistake by the Fed and the U.S. government, warning that it could lead to even greater instability in the banking system and larger future losses. Schiff added, the bailout means depositors will put their money in the riskiest banks and get paid higher interest. So in the long run, many more banks will fail and the far greater long-term costs. This is pretty interesting because when we're looking at the situation, these people can see exactly what's going to happen. So they're guaranteeing with our money, these banks that are failing and the nature of the interest problem. And so these banks, when they fail, each depositor is supposed to be covered up to $250,000. Unfortunately, the way that it's working out is different. And it's interesting when we look at some of these stats. I'm actually going to take a look at one of these real quick. We have an interesting situation there because what happens is they make all these risky bets and then they expect us to cover them. And then when they fail, they get bailed out. And so this is the nature of the bailouts as we're seeing them. So as far as I can tell, we're all in a situation where, the Biden administration does not have the ability to write a check that they can't cash, because basically they're bouncing checks in our name. So what they should do is allow those banks to fail. There's a massive banking meltdown that's happening, and no one's explaining it exactly right yet, because I think people in general are confused. And there's been a lot of the rhetoric, for years about, oh, everything's melting down and all the rest of it. And that's true. But, the problem is there's been such consistent rhetoric around everything melting down that when it actually starts to melt down, people are like, huh? And this is the nature of the situation that we're in. But I think what they're trying to do is protect Biden in this situation. And because of that, Biden is basically in a position where, as these banks get shaken up, they're trying to cover them. And that's, putting us in a situation where we are looking at covering all these bad bets that these millionaire, billionaire investors have made, probably a lot of them contributors to the Biden campaign. So he's trying to use that. They're trying to keep that flow going of covering these banks until the election's over, and they can either drag Biden or his successor across the finish line. So it's a dangerous situation, I think, that it puts us in. And you're going to see that in combination with some of these larger protests become a real focus here over the course of the next few weeks. And I'm going to actually move into this kind of crazy scenario that I've been tracking. Before I do that, Miss Olivia, you're up.
I just want to throw this out there. Al Qaeda says, did Trump get charged with stealing his own money?
I like that. That's a good point, actually. You could look at it that way. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole chicanery thing. And I'm actually going to read Jonathan Turley's article, a couple of key points because Turley over and over again makes great judgments. And it's interesting. One of the reasons I like Turley is he's the guy who tried to get the workers at Area 51 represented because the government had denied the base for so long that when there was a big chemical burning problem and they were all coming down with all these various ailments, nobody could cover them because there was nothing going on that in relation to this where they could say, hey, Area 51 exists and these workers there are having problems. There wasn't any court process. So Turley actually got that. And that's the interesting background, I think, with a guy like him. Let's take a look at this one. First of all, there is apparently a grudge match here. This guy got in on the election promise of, going ahead and indicting Trump, which is a ridiculous thing because you don't have a legal basis to just say, I'm going to go after that guy. You're a DA. If you don't do that responsibly, then you're out. Then you're the one that gets indicted. And so a lot of prosecutors, including Bragg, took a look at this case and said, we're not prosecuting that. It's ridiculous. We have to try to prove that, Trump, in going through back channels to pay off Stormy Daniels so she wouldn't talk about their affair, that this money somehow came out of the campaign. And so it was a campaign violation. Even that type of stuff is usually a misdemeanor. And I think Bill Clinton has paid off 25 of those already. So what exactly are we talking about here? We're talking about political prosecution in its kind of purest form. Now, as Bragg's case against Trump, this is an interesting thing that took place. Trump got the heads up because he has his own intelligence network going on. He got the heads up that this guy was going to go for it and arrest him on Tuesday. So he announced that he's on his own social media, Truth Social Media. He said, this guy's going to try to arrest me. Come on. And what took place is interesting because instead of having the ability to do that and the surprise and the jump, they started to stumble on Bragg's side. Whereas here we are on Friday. I thought the arrest was going to take place Tuesday because pretty much everyone did. But here we are in the middle of, Friday night, and it hasn't happened yet. Now, it may happen, but it seems like they stumbled there. And so now you have this other piece of news happening where, Bragg got a letter and it had dangerous white powder in it. It's going to be this kind of nonsense so that they can make him look like a victim again. So in my opinion, that op has failed. We'll see if they can revive it or not. What they're trying to do is ramp up the other cases. Remember the classified documents case? That's where they raided Mar-a-Lago, and they never raid presidents. It's just not has ever happened in history. So they made Trump the ultimate exception for this. And as it turned out, this really wasn't such a bright idea. Whatever they were up to, they didn't get. But whatever it was, it may somehow relate to something deep inside the government files that Trump is aware of and maybe kept a copy of. And, in terms of general classified documents, Obama has something like 4 million documents from his administration. Clinton, they're still trying to get documents. Richard Nixon's tapes, they're still in court with the Nixon family trying to get those. I mean, it's not the kind of thing you go to prison over. So, unless they can prove you're selling secrets to, North Korea, I mean, you're pretty much in good shape. So, but this is interesting. In lieu of the Bragg failure, they went ahead and said on Wednesday, with unusual speed, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit swatted down an attempt by former President Donald Trump to block a lower court order that his lawyer, Evan Corcoran, immediately turn over documents subpoenaed by special counsel Jack Smith's grand jury. Trump could also appeal to the Supreme Court, but that wouldn't go anywhere either, as it appears he's already opted against it. Smith is investigating Trump's potential national security law violations, which, by the way, along the road here, they found that Pence had classified documents and Biden had classified documents in his garage and things of this nature. Smith is investigating the national security law violations and obstruction of justice surrounding classified documents that Trump improperly kept in Mar-a-Lago, rather than comply with the May 22 grand jury subpoena compelling their return. The documents Corcoran was ordered to disclose Wednesday apparently included attorney notes of conversations between Corcoran and Trump, as well as audio files. Now, remember this. The whole thing may not be about arresting Trump, but getting their hands on that thing that he has that they want. And this is what I think they're looking for. I think it's a deep scan of something that's in Trump's possession that they want to get their hands on. And, when you're dealing with the types of insights that we do on this show, that goes into different places than just, hot political potatoes. It could definitely relate to something like the UFO file secret, something relating to the JFK classified files that show the CIA acted to remove the 35th president of the United States, things of this nature, which Trump may keep in his own possession so they didn't try the types of things that they tried during his administration. It has to be noted also that there's a thing about what we have to understand about Watergate, for example, which is that it wasn't the crime itself that was going to lead back to the White House. It was the cover-up of the crime that was attempted by the Nixon White House after it had happened. So had he let those guys, go to prison for breaking in, and had he, not had anything to lose on that front, it would have gone differently for him. But because he tried to intervene with the FBI and the CIA and say, don't follow up on this case, then it becomes a crime of obstruction on his part. So they may also be looking to second guess Trump into a phase where he, moves into a obstruction of justice thing by passing off this file to a third party. So what we're hearing about on the surface, Stormy Daniels, classified documents, it's all a smokescreen to get at this something else. And whenever, when you're talking about what it could be, we have quite a track record of looking at the real roots of Donald Trump's rise to power. And it's very different than a lot of things that you'll see out there, and includes the fact that his uncle was very well aware of the UFO file and was called into the Tesla papers all the way back in 1943 before he was born. So, he's kind of born into this extra knowledge, and it cannot be, emphasized enough that Trump's knowledge around the UFO file may be kind of the ultimate stickler, the thing, why the deep state, you have to kind of peel them off the ceiling whenever Trump is mentioned, is because he's operating on a very similar level as they are. And that's problematic because they always have the jump on these presidents. And I think in the case of Trump, it is remarkably so through the figure of Roy Cohn, who was his political mentor after all. And we know that Cohn not only had the jump on the UFO file, but he knew where the bodies were buried in the deep state. So Trump becomes kind of a triple threat in that sense. He operates under different policies. He's not as controllable because he has his own money, and he also knows about the UFO file. Now, whatever you want to say about Trump, or, like his policies, or, Democrat, Republican, Green Party, it doesn't matter. We're talking about is a battle inside the heart of the American national security state. And when we get in there, we need to know what's fueling that problem. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show, deep tonight on the emergency powers, the Trump indictment, and more on the UFO file. Stay tuned for some crazy revelations in this episode. We're only going to do a short report tonight, not our usual 3-hour extravaganza X series show. I want to remind you, if you haven't already, to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter, especially if you're new. And what that allows you to do is to get access to some of the amazing interviews and X series episodes and events and things that are coming up before anyone else. Make sure you get that delivered to you and stand up and be counted. And it's a free newsletter. And the only other thing I'll say about it is, it's not like a heavy marketing thing or whatever. You get it once a week and you'll be in the know, and you won't have to rely on just social media notices, which we know can be pretty touch and go. So I'm going to jump into a section here all about Turley and what he has to say about Bragg. Before I do it, Miss Olivia.
Okay, CC Jarvis, DJ, any suspicion that other countries' COG are in cahoots with one another? If so, any possibility of X-Files overlap as a motivator for government bad behavior?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of truth, actually, to that. One of the things that we need to understand about the continuity of government program is that it's founded in America, and it's an American deep state power wielder. However, we can see COG going global more and more with the emergency reaction. So as things merge on that kind of one world government stage, we find the whole thing going into continuity of governments. But certainly the COG is an American program. I'm actually going to read something so we understand the nature of the emergency powers in this case. This is from Professor Peter Dale Scott. And one of the things I say about Professor Scott's work is it's so largely influential. And, the professor is, I think he's 91 years old now. And he's been writing about these things since the 1970s. So he's had that wide scale influence. And I think it's fairly accurate to describe him as a left coast liberal, but, and teaching at Berkeley and everything. But, he understands the deep state. So if you're on the right or the left, you just, he gives you the outline of what it is. And that's so interesting to me that this has been happening a lot, is that people who deliver for some particular stripe, if they're not of the party, or if they're not on the political stripe of the person, then they throw the information out the window. And I've seen that a lot as well. So we try not to do that. Whether you're on the right, left, or in the middle, the information is the information. But I think it's kind of fascinating that so much of that seeing through the deep state piece was done largely on the left. If you go through the 60s and 70s, they're the ones, 60s, 70s, 80s, even into the 90s, it was largely a counterculture coming from the left-hand side, so you can find them covering things like the Bilderberg Group and government abuses of power, continuity of government. On the right, what's interesting is this, through the kind of Alex Jones wave and things of this nature, even Rush Limbaugh to a certain degree, then that became, they became picking up and moving against the government. And the government turns at that point, and all the neocons are like, oh, on the right, they're getting the idea about civil liberties and everything. Let's get out of there and let's jump into the left. And, we'll use the MSNBC thing, but it's the same fascism jumping around, whether it's on the right and saying, you can't pick up sticks on Sunday, or you're a communist, or if you're on the left and you say, everyone's a racist, then it's still that fascist thing operating for power, looking through the prism. At this point, we're kind of moved past those identifications when it gets into this information. So there's something inside the continuity of government program that Professor Scott has pointed out, which is called the Doomsday Network. And the Doomsday Network is in place there and has been since the 1940s in case there was a nuclear exchange, particularly built up as a large underground infrastructure during the Eisenhower administration, because, tensions ran high enough for them to think, what will happen in the event of a nuclear exchange? Well, sometime during the Kennedy administration, the Doomsday Network, that is the communications network that is associated with this continuity of government group, was utilized during the assassination. So for the planning on the internal side to remove the president, they used the Doomsday Network. And the personnel from the Doomsday Network kept showing up in other, what Professor Scott would call deep events: Watergate, Kennedy assassination, Iran-Contra, the 2008 financial crash, September 2001, 9/11 attacks. All of the personnel seem to go back to this Doomsday COG network. Now, during the COVID crisis, the COVID op, we saw Terrence O'Shaughnessy, who was the Northcom commander. The Northcom is something that we got after 9/11. And it's basically there. The idea is, under an emergency situation, Northcom takes over So when they issue COG, we get the Northcom commander and a bunch of regional governors. And they say, oh, we'll stabilize the situation, and then someday we'll have elections again. But in the meantime, we're all under fascist control. Now, O'Shaughnessy, during that period, came out and was giving interviews with the media and was like on boats and waving. And it was just crazy PR campaign. And suddenly everyone could talk about COG, the Continuity of Government program. And this had been largely secret. When I did my first interview with Professor Scott, we're talking 2014, nobody had really even heard of this program. I mean, it was largely underground. And basically, Professor Scott had been talking about it for 30 years. But when it got brought up in Congress, they would say, you can't talk about that here, only in executive session. And there were a number of instances like that, and they didn't mention it in the media at all. So for them to be freewheeling with it caught my attention immediately. And I became disturbed in that period leading up to COVID that they were already casually mentioning continuity of government. And of course, when it happened and they started talking loosely about it in Newsweek, I went to Newsweek and challenged some of their reporting. And Newsweek blocked Dark Journalist, joining the likes of Lou Elizondo. But for me, it was very telling. So it lets us know that there's something operating there in that system. And they wanted to normalize the idea. Then you had Nancy Pelosi saying, hey, actually, I'm third in line. If continuity of government happens, I'm going to be right there. So that was weird, too. Then Trump got COVID at the end of the 2020 election. And during that October, there were a bunch of weird moves in the background. But one of the things they had done just previously is they switched out this relatively young, like early 50s, Northcom commander who'd only had the job for a short period of time. And they had him move into this, retirement, and they put in Admiral Van Herk, General Van Herk. Now, Van Herk is interesting. He's the one who showed up during these balloon shoot downs and all the rest. And I think the way that they put him forward was really as a kind of a savior. And so we need to keep in mind that they want to create this whole sense of, with the continuity of government program, that they can take over and that it's constitutional, etc. It's not. The COG program itself, aside from wanting to survive a nuclear attack, any infrastructure beyond that is completely illegal. In the 80s, Rumsfeld and Cheney with Reagan, it was actually with Bush because Reagan was kind of out of it after his assassination, they put this together and they advanced all the ideas that we don't only need a nuclear emergency, we need any emergency. That's what changed COG from just this program in the background to really gathering in those government resources. And it's why it poses such a threat now, and why the emergency powers that are being pulled in France, we've seen happen in Canada, that we see happening in the bank system, are going to move to a national emergency because they don't have that popularity to govern, and certainly not with Stepford Biden. Okay. This is from Professor Scott. The COG measures implemented on 9/11 had supplemented Hoover's powers. Now remember, J. Edgar Hoover had a version of continuity of government way back then in the 50s that not only would we, try to survive this attack, but we'd also round up dissidents. That became a big focus of Cheney and Rumsfeld later, and this is still part of the group. They still keep that list. The COG measures implemented on 9/11 have supplemented Hoover's powers with parallel powers developed by the CIA and NSA as foreseen in the Houston Plan. The Houston Plan, again, is something that came out of the Nixon administration. It's basically like a CIA run out of the White House. Plus the worst FBI illegalities from the emergency era of the 1960s. Torture practiced by the FBI in an extreme situation became embodied in legal memoranda as a standard way to interrogate suspects. Preemptive murder of opponents as practiced by the FBI in Meridian in Chicago is now the standard practice of the drone program initiated by Bush and Cheney and since expanded by Obama. In brief, as I said earlier, the aims of Hooverism were to maintain the status quo, while the aim of the doomsday mania has been explicitly to change the status quo. This is crucial. They don't want to maintain the government. They want to change it. This is what they're up to. Hoover's actions against the Klan were accompanied by similar illegal actions against Martin Luther King, whom he once characterized on the record as the most notorious liar in the country. The two campaigns, set side by side, reveal Hoover's commitment to the status quo against any forces, legal or illegal, violent or nonviolent, threatening change. His tactics to crush the Klan were clearly illegal, but they were in response to murders and a challenge to the public order. So he was using, the nature of those things as a way to act illegally himself. In this respect, Hoover's deep state illegalities can be distinguished from those we have witnessed since 9/11's against al-Qaeda. Hoover's actions were finite and narrowly targeted in order to achieve a successful consolidation of federal law. His methods were essentially nonviolent against the nonviolent, violent against the violent. The implementation of COG planning we've seen since 9/11 has been, in contrast, an open-ended erosion of law and liberty, increasing year by year with no end in sight. This is what we're talking about. This is the heart of the continuity of government program. There's a lot more there by Professor Scott, and to be honest with you, I could read it all night because he's so on the money with it. But the book is The American Deep State, and I highly recommend that. And Professor Scott's work, as I said, from the JFK assassination through cocaine politics and his tracking of the deep state, he's the person who popularized the term the deep state. So he's very foundational in this regard. And many of those deep state researchers, they know a lot. And it actually frustrates me when I get around the UFO thing, because the UFO researchers don't know anything like what the deep state researchers do. So I see a huge deficit on their side. And I also saw that when the actual deep state rolled into the UFO field, they castrated the UFO researchers, because the UFO researchers were like, hey, suddenly, we're going to be able to make a living. And this was a really big problem. And we still see that going on, the consolidation of those figures. The whole UFO field should have stood up and thrown off that CIA thing that came up with Lou Elizondo and figures of this kind. But this all plays into this deep state thing that's going on behind the scenes, and the Trump indictments are part of it, as are these bank failures, as are these future cyber blackouts. So this is the thing that we're trying to get a handle on as we move forward here. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is a special report going deep tonight, and it's great to have so many of you here with us. We're going to be taking your questions in about another 40 minutes or so. I'm going to try to get through most of the rest of this. And this one has quite a, we're forward looking into the election. So there's some traditional kind of political pieces in this report. But what's hanging out in the clash in the deep state and why things are so bizarre is this completely unspoken piece of relating to advanced technology in the UFO file, which is driving so much of what's happening here. So that economic people who have that focus, they get a lot of things that are going on, but they don't get this part. Political people who are great researchers on politics, they get a lot of what's going on, but they don't get this part. So if we can kind of merge some of this consciousness together, I think we're going to be doing ourselves quite a favor. I want to remind everyone also that a week from tonight is the anniversary show that we're doing for the X series. That's a two-parter coming up, and it's Friday and Saturday, March 31st and April 1st at 8 p.m. I hope you all will be there. I'm already looking forward to that one for you. And we have a lot of great surprises coming up there. Before I go any further, Miss Olivia.
Romaine Pillard, did you hear or read about this mothership coming to Earth?
Yeah, I guess I can skip ahead to that part of it. Hold everything. Well, this actually dovetails quite nicely with the next piece of this. All right, so Avi Loeb, who we've brought up a number of times on this program, he runs something called Galileo Project, but he was also part of Talpiot, and that was, in Israel, that's like the CIA. So he has that deep kind of intelligence piece. When he comes here to Harvard, and his lab is maybe 5 minutes from the studio, weird things started to happen. Like Chris Mellon, the former Bush DOD official, who started showing up in the middle of all this circus of UFO disclosure, which is the false disclosure run by the CIA. He started showing up and becoming a part of the Galileo Project. The next thing that happened is that they took Elizondo, who was clear CIA people. He's a CIA personnel, 25-year history, and suddenly he's on the board of the Galileo Project. Then all of a sudden I started, from tracking the Galileo Project initially, you see scientist this, scientist that. Now it's like CIA guy, CIA guy, CIA guy. So in the middle of all this kind of pumping up of the UFO threat over the past few years by this group inspired, to do this by the Central Intelligence Agency that we've reported on so much on this show, they've been promoting a UFO threat to get that emergency powers piece going. Now, in the middle of all that, what happened was they were like, we have a different op because this UFO threat is getting kind of unpopular. Let's try this out. And what happened was they had this Avi Loeb character say, you know what? Actually, what's going on is a little bit different. It's a big, like, mothership, a Muamua, that's been watching us, and it's been putting out these little spores, and they've been going down here and monitoring us and all the rest. So a draft paper by Harvard scientist at the head of the Pentagon's UFO office has raised an idea of an alien mothership could be in the solar system, sending out tiny probes dubbed dandelion seeds to explore the planets within. Could an alien mothership be hovering around our solar system? This is live science. This is not like something far out. This is a traditional science website. In a draft paper, a Pentagon official and a Harvard scientist. The Pentagon official is the guy who runs AARO, which is the UFO Defense Office, UFO DOE, and Sean Kirkpatrick. And Kirkpatrick and the things that he has to say are all very strange and all lend themselves to this, the UFOs are here and, we need to kind of shoot them down kind of thing. In a draft paper, the pair said it is feasible an extraterrestrial spaceship could be in our galactic neighborhood exploring the region by means of dandelion seeds, small spacecraft that can gather and send back information similar to the way humans send out spacecraft to explore planets. Now, I completely reject this idea of, motherships and a Muamua and Avi Loeb's thing. But we know that there's a very active program of some sort involving UFOs, and certainly that some of those are off-world civilizations. Now, there's a big thrust, though, of understanding that we need to get to when it comes to the UFO file, which is there's a heck of a lot going on inside the government related to the development of this advanced technology as well. So let's not lose that in this discussion. And also that, when you get into it in the fine detail that we do on this program, you're going to find ancient civilizations possess this technology. So then it raises the question, is somebody operating side by side with us here, as extraordinary as that may sound? Well, it can't sound that extraordinary because there was a congressman who came forward, Mike Gallagher, and as soon as they had these UFO hearings in 2022, he started going on traditional radio shows, like Fox Radio and things of this nature, and saying, you know what? These are time travelers coming back and looking at, all the things that we're doing here. So they were kind of throwing at everything, spaghetti against the wall, and seeing what was going to stick. This is the nature of the situation. Let's go a little bit further with this Loeb thing, because Loeb's thing is an AI. So it's an AI, and his whole directive is we need to get up on the level of AI in order to communicate with it. And as soon as we get up to that level, we'll start to understand what its messages are. So the alien AI, I'm sure, is going to say, oh, you're destroying your environment, and therefore you need to tax your citizens with a carbon tax. So it's kind of a weird control mechanism, but they're looking for that voice of God idea through an actual event of this nature. Now, Loeb is known for his research into a Muamua, an interstellar visitor from beyond the solar system. Astronomers first detected the cigar-shaped object in 2017 and actually thought it was a comet. However, in elongated shape, its lack of coma, the cloud of gas that envelop a comet, and the fact that it was accelerating away from the sun, and questions about the comet theory, Loeb suggested instead that Oumuamua was an alien spaceship. Now, remember this, that on the Galileo Project over here at Harvard, as I said, the board that's there with Avi Loeb as he goes through these various scenarios with the media, and they're constantly covering him. Hey, Harvard scientist says he believes in aliens. Well, all the people who supported the UFO threat piece that hasn't worked yet were all on that board. He assigned them all. Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, they're all there. So there's another CIA piece, and it seems like you can't get away from the Central Intelligence Agency when you're doing anything related to the UFO file. This is a big problem, and we're going to see why here as we go along. I'm going to switch gears into that, and then we're going to get back to the rest of this indictment piece, and then I'm going to throw it over to you.
Okay, sounds good.
How are you doing out there?
Great. Chris Lothian says, how on earth or otherwise could anyone know if it was a mothership? Does that imply that there's offspring flying around too?
Yeah, I think that whole thing, when they say there's spores, dandelion seeds, that those are supposed to be little ships coming off of the big ship. And, again, what they're doing is they're exploiting research that's been out there in relation to the UFO file. So, we've seen over the years this whole thing about motherships, et cetera. That's actually a term that we used ourselves in our own Air Force before it got applied to the UFO file. And then in the 50s, there's all kinds of things about the mothership. And, of course, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, that whole shebang. In the 1970s, that's all about a mothership landing and all the rest. Now, there have been a few people inside of the UFO operation of this. And again, I think what we're really talking about is that in 2016, when Trump got into office, he was not supposed to get into office. It was supposed to be Hillary Clinton. Something went wrong with that. And we know it was a tight election and all the bizarroness. But nonetheless, all the people around the UFO threat thing decided to go for it anyway, including this whole TTSA CIA piece. So now we have this guy being promoted, Ryan Graves, who is one of the pilots that they brought forward. And, I have no doubt that somebody like Graves would see UFOs. A lot of Navy pilots do. My only problem with Graves is that he is a defense contractor. He has his own defense contracting company. And therefore, if he's out there promoting the UFO thing, and then his company starts offering UFO defense contracts, or if the UFO DOE office starts hiring him as a contractor, it seems to me a very clear conflict of interest. And this is an important piece, I think, for us to really get a handle on with these people, because they're driving with the media and the need for ratings and all the rest of it. A weird conversation around the UFO file that has nothing to do with the actual nature of it, but just drives this threat piece. So, if somebody like Graves, for example, wrote a book about his experience or did a documentary and made a lot of money, who cares? But if he's using that experience in order to get defense contracts, since he's a defense contractor, I think the whole thing is highly unethical. And I think it should be called out. And the people around this operation, whether it's Graves, or Elizondo or Mellon or anybody, they're always welcome on this program to have a gentleman's discussion and a gentleman's debate related to it. And, what they do instead is, they try to really stay far, far away from deep conversations. And it's funny because, on Twitter now they have these things, which are Twitter Spaces. And they're still kind of working up the technology to make this work, but it's a big debate conversation, and they have moderators and things. But one thing that I think is good there, which is it's very hard to get away with lying. And what you see in the CNN interviews and the softball Fox interviews and all the rest of the network stuff around the UFO files, those guys can just sit there and lie their heads off. So you have Elizondo saying, I was an ex-Pentagon guy, I'm a whistleblower, and all the rest of it. Look, that's Elizondo and Mellon. Mellon's the financier of the op. Elizondo is one of the CIA grunt people in the op. And the middle guy, you never hear much about, Jim Semivan, is such a secret CIA operative and such a high-level guy that he didn't appear in print until 2015. So no one even knew he existed. So those are the people running the UFO operation. So when you get those people involved on the network level, and they're sitting down, and these people think, like Tucker or somebody else thinks, oh, I'm covering the UFO thing, and they get a bunch of CIA people in, or Joe Rogan sits there with Chris Mellon. Come on, it has nothing to do. They're just pitching the CIA program, and you're exposing it to a large audience. So there's a real complete lack of potency there, and you're not getting the real thing. So, what we need is a real environment where we can explore these things, which is why I mentioned the spaces thing. I actually think YouTube is a much better format for it. But what I want to point out is it was interesting to me in listening to some of those that you could not, if you had like Ryan Graves, Lou Elizondo, and Chris Mellon in a roundtable, and you asked them real questions, the whole op would have disintegrated. We wouldn't have had to wait 5 years. I'm going to read later from a report in the New York Post that shows that the things that we were saying about the TTSA operation, including about Elizondo being a fraud and all the rest of it, were absolutely true. Now it's in national press. Now it's starting to be exposed. But it took 5 years for them to catch on to stuff we were reporting in 2018. So you see how this loop works. In order to get a handle on it, you have to be able to question it. And therefore, you can't do this softball thing. When TTSA came out and they were pushing this UFO threat, disclosure thing, and you had all the people in the UFO field, George Knapp and all that, giving them softball interviews. How does it feel to be a hero versus an innovator? Do you feel more like a hero or more like an innovator? Well, they should have been asking them, hey, are you still working for the CIA? And is this all part of some CIA op that you're doing? And these are the questions that were missed. And even guys who you thought would be a natural for it, like Richard Dolan or somebody like that, they caved. So we have to look at this and, get it on a level where we really understand. You need some kind of a format for driving this conversation that has nothing to do with the kind of softball PR setups and sound bites and things. You need real discussions and real questions. And you're not getting that in the very, the kind of Rogan situation or the Tucker situation. It's not there. I've listened for it. It doesn't happen. Yeah.
Okay, this is a perfect moment to ask this question.
Oh, yeah.
So Undestroyer says, Redacted just covered the UFO threat with DeSouza. It was impressively mostly what you have been reporting on here. What is your opinion of John DeSouza, ex-FBI?
Well, look, the way that I look at it is I wish anyone well who's trying to get to the bottom of the UFO thing, and but I think, again, if you look at the whole redacted thing, they're friends with Tucker Carlson, former Fox producers. It seems to me like a pretty lightweight thing. It seems like they can have depth when they're dealing with politics, but you get this a lot. When it gets around the UFO file, it's very easy to get dodgy things. And so you're looking just for this one thing. Does somebody have a credential? And then you go cherry pick somebody with a credential and you feel like, I'm legitimate. I'm talking to somebody with a credential. Well, it's not so, because if you're dealing with intelligence people, then that's not a good way to go about it. So not so much with redacted and the FBI guy. It's totally different. And, you have to kind of look a little bit deeper in situations like that as well. But my point is this: around this CIA operation, they are using the networks, and the networks think, oh, like, I'm covering the UFO thing, how deep I am. You're not. And you're missing the whole thing, which is they're playing you. And that's the nature of the problem. So, if we can get a different discussion going, then it falls out of the CIA hands and those people go crazy, So we've seen how they act when things get a little bit out of hand. They start going after the people that are doing regular news journalism reports on them. The CIA piece around the UFO thing is dangerous, or I wouldn't even put such a focus on it. But you can see that where everyone, as I stated at the beginning of the program, when we get into emergency powers, we're dealing with completely unconstitutional, wiping away generations of democratic rule. This is a, democratic republic here in the United States. You can't just turn around and get rid of all that and get rid of the American Revolution and everything back since Jefferson, because, you've got an emergency that you say gives you unlimited power. I didn't read that in the Constitution, that an emergency gives you the ability to suspend the Constitution. It's not in there. So, let's take a deep breath and look at the emergency powers. They use them in France to hustle these things through without a legislator vote. All right, well, that's France. That's bad news for them, and the people are giving them what they deserve. In America, we see it with the banks. Oh, we're going to use all your money to cover every bank. This is what they said initially. And suddenly everyone was like, wait a minute, you're going to cover every deposit? Are you nationalizing the banks? What's happening here? And then they stepped back a little and said, well, we're going to make sure those banks cover it themselves. And then the banks started to tank. And so they came back out, and Janet Yellen has all these confused statements going on. So what they did was they bailed out the Silicon Valley Bank. There's no question about that. And the Fed is giving guarantees, and handing out $136 billion. Well, those banks should be failing. And the people who are in charge of those banks, if they didn't have the money to cover the people's deposits, should be going to jail. This is the same problem we had in 2008. And Obama said, I'm going to come in and clean everything up. And what did he do? Obama came in and became the clerk for the bankers. He didn't clean up anything. And Clinton, when he was in office, this is, Democrat, Republicans, they all act the same around this. What did he do? He removed Glass-Steagall, which is the thing that they put in place originally during the Roosevelt era, so that banks wouldn't use the deposits on the commercial side. They wouldn't use the regular deposits on their commercial investing stuff, so that, they weren't taking gigantic risks with ordinary citizens' money. So, there's just too many roads to go down with this. So fundamentally, I oppose any kind of bailout. We should oppose any kind of bailout, because the only thing that they're doing is taking money that we've put into the system and giving you an IOU and saying, hey, I gave all that money to my billionaire friend who's going to help me win the next election. That's no way to run a country. And that's why Biden is going down in such a hard way. It's why there's such an opening for other candidates like Kennedy and President Trump. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show deep tonight here in the special report. Let's see what's next. I want to raise this a little bit. Now, we've looked at the possibility of Trump with RFK Jr. facing off against each other in 2024. And there is a good possibility for this, believe it or not. And I'll show you how this scenario runs. Trump right now is at 30 points over DeSantis. But an interesting thing, even in the Democrat poll, he's 6 points above Biden, 48-42. And Biden's approval rating is 37% in a Democrats poll. So this is some of the worst numbers ever, and they're not covering it, which I find interesting. Biden approval rating nears lowest point of presidency. That just came out yesterday. And if we get a few things going on that, President Biden's approval rating is nearing its lowest point of his presidency, according to a new poll, following a string of bank failures that have thrown even more uncertainty into the economy. Look, there's not going to be any level of voter hijinks that you can pull if those banks fail. You've been dishing out all of the money to Ukraine and Zelensky. Those banks are failing. When we had a huge environmental disaster in East Palestine, Ohio, the president didn't even go there. Okay. So he was over there saying to Ukrainians that he was going to guarantee their pensions, which is ridiculous. And I support us getting behind any ally for sure, but we can't handle their pensions. We've got ridiculous inflation, and, we have absurd black budget problems and all the rest of it. And now our banks are shaky, and you're dishing out money to Ukraine because all of these defense contracts are going through there. And by the way, along the line, it actually personally enriched the Biden family. So there's all sorts of problems with that. But the stupidest part of the whole thing is that in the middle of it all, they're kind of daring Russia to go head to head with us. And Russia's a nuclear armed nation, obviously, who we, for many, decades have successfully, due to great presidential leadership, like John F. Kennedy and President Reagan, stayed away from having nuclear wars and exchanges with countries like that because of the risk of the disaster of a nuclear war. Now, these people, because Biden's not really in charge, he's not all there, the committee behind him is just a bunch of neocons who moved from the right-wing parties, causing wars in Iraq and other places, and now they're in the Democratic Party doing the same thing. In the background are these deep state contractors like Lockheed Martin and Boeing, and they're getting great paydays from all this. And the problem is that in the middle of all that, they also have a great expanse of advanced exotic technology that we understand exists inside the UFO file. So there's a lot of things that need to come up here. And I think the 2024 election is the breakthrough election for this, where the UFO file goes squarely on the table and whoever addresses it wins. That's going to be kind of a heavy factor going forward. Okay, more on this. RFK Jr. This is all very interesting. Okay, a couple of weeks ago, he says, I am seriously considering running for president. In the background, from my own sources, which, the Kennedy operation is a Boston one after all, I've learned that he is running. So we're going to see RFK Jr. running for president in 2024. What he has on his side is the incredible track record of going after the pharmaceutical companies and others like Monsanto, achieving justice as a lawyer, along with the incredible Kennedy legacy as well. What is working against him is that the media is, dubs him an anti-vax, conspiracy theorist and all this kind of thing. And even the Democrats don't want to deal with him. Here's what RFK Jr. had to say. Like many people, I've spent the past few years thinking deeply about the issues facing America. Our nation is at a crossroads. Next year's election will be the most important in our lifetimes. I agree. For more than a century, New Hampshire has been fertile ground for the strongest Democratic candidate. Now more than ever, it is important that the Democratic Party have a primary campaign that produces our party's most competitive candidate. Now, what happened was they saw RFK Jr. coming, and Biden, who got something like 3% of the vote last time when he ran in New Hampshire and was almost thrown out of the race as a result, doesn't want that disaster again. He wants to run in South Carolina, where he's guaranteed in South Carolina with, his large-scale government programs and everything else to get a more convincing vote for him as president. If he starts off that presidential run and loses in New Hampshire, which he absolutely would, then that person can take the whole momentum. And in this case, it would be RFK Jr., maybe someone else as well. What we're looking at is very tricky in regards to this, because by moving that calendar around, they're changing something that's been in place for decades. So people of New Hampshire should not allow that calendar to be changed by the DNC. And the DNC went back to New Hampshire when they complained and said, we won't send you any money for the election if you don't do it. And they also said no debates. We don't care who the challenger is. So that's ridiculous. So this is what RFK Jr. decided, okay, this is the time for me to announce this, and I'm going to go straight at this situation. I will go ahead and announce that. So he wrote a big, long letter to the DNC in New Hampshire and said, this is wrong. And, what kind of message does that send, et cetera. So this is why we're at this interesting juncture, shall we say, in relation to the 2024 election. On the other side of the fence, we have Trump, who in a very controversial, shall we say, election, supposedly didn't get a second term. And, this was a very strange series of events, as we know. And shortly after that, the whole J6 thing and everything else, they try to, make Washington, D.C. like an armed camp, which you can't do. I mean, this is just against the whole idea of the founding of a democratic republic. So they've tried to push that. And the only thing that they have seen with Trump is that he has this popularity dealing with populism and common, ordinary people who think this guy can understand, not because he's a billionaire, but because, he believes in America. He's not afraid to say so. He'll protect the border and all the rest of it. Now, Trump, however you feel about him, there's some fundamentals to the things that he presents and that he was able to prove he could do during his own presidency. One, he had a fantastic economy, the best economy that America has had since the 1980s. Two, he was able to protect the border from the incredible. We've had over 3 million people just cross into the border. I mean, on any chart, that's a gigantic failure, but the Biden people are doing it on purpose. So the idea of securing that border and not being afraid of the political consequences also puts in people's minds this guy is more on the level of the average American. So, President Trump has all kinds of foibles and things that make people second guess him and all the rest of it. So he'll have to win on his own merits. But nonetheless, he's poised very well to win the Republican nomination. And that's why you see all of these things in place to try to take him down. Because if he wins the Republican nomination and these banks are failing and Stepford Biden is stumbling around and, drooling on himself, then he is definitely going to win in 2024. The thing that's interesting and what could be a gigantic lightning bolt in the middle of all this is if somehow RFK Jr. gets that nomination on the Democratic side by coming up with a surprise victory early on over Stepford Biden. I think that it's a very desirable outcome and that we should be looking at a win-win situation of Trump versus Kennedy in 2024. And certainly they can both get together to defeat Biden, which I think that they both have that in mind. Under the circumstances, either scenario would be so infinitely better than Biden. I don't think it should be a Democrat or Republican issue at all. And so I hope that one of them becomes the nominee and then the candidate that wins for president. Interestingly enough, I have the perfect slogan for the presidency. I won't reveal it yet, but one of them is going to get it from me, and we'll see who that is. But certainly absolutely fascinating as we go here. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're going along quite well, and we are going to now shift into a little more of this election mode. There's a few things I want to get on the record. Then we'll take your questions, let's say, starting in about 15 minutes.
Okay, can I throw something at you?
Yes, please.
David Donaway, the Democrats can leave such an economic disaster. It will be immensely hard for Republicans to fix anything in less than 8 years, especially if war with China heats up. And unless Trump runs on a promise to pardon Julian Assange, his morality is questionable. Has RFK Jr. said anything about Julian Assange and pardoning him?
Oh, he certainly has. As a matter of fact, he's put it on the record that it's a disgrace that Assange is there, and I have no doubt in my mind. Now, remember this, that if Assange gets pardoned on our side, it only means he doesn't face extradition and then prison in America. There's still what they're doing to him in the UK. And so it's not the be-all, end-all to pardon him from here, but it's the first thing we should do. And he could put pressure on the UK to release Assange. Trump notably said that he had, considered strongly, and Glenn Greenwald, of all people, said that this was true, that he was lobbying him on behalf of both Assange and Edward Snowden, and that Trump was very close, but they were threatening Trump so heavily at the end there. If you release anything about the JFK files, or if you do any pardons like this, we'll vote for your impeachment, which is weird, because he went through one impeachment thing and over this phone call, which was ridiculous, with the Ukraine phone call. And then they were like, oh, we've got him impeached for this. It didn't work. And it was another impeachment, the multiple impeachments that they were doing, wasting your money to carry out these political vendettas. And then the final one was just an exercise to say, oh, because you abused the presidency, we're going to impeach you. It had no basis in anything. But it gave them the ability on the way out to control Trump's actions for what he would have done at the end. So instead of, people like Assange or somebody, he just would pardon kind of in-house cronies. So that is a weird situation. Trump is going to have to face, and it comes up in this article that I have about DeSantis, and this is kind of an interesting scenario, which is that DeSantis can run to the right of Trump on the vaccine issue. But what's not mentioned here is that RFK Jr. has incredible, just remarkable credibility around this issue. So he can run in a position strong to Trump. If Trump needs to adopt a new way of describing his effort, because it was the government and Fauci and all these people leading the vaccine effort, and then Trump moving into this whole thing about the vaccine. He originally selected Kennedy to run a vaccine commission, and then Bill Gates, of all people, talked President Trump out of it, which is a disaster, unfortunately. And Bill Gates comes up in a minute here too, because you're not going to believe what he's up to next. Inside, Ron DeSantis planned to ride anti-vaxxism to the White House. Okay, that's a Vanity Fair article. It just came out. Interestingly enough, inside here, we get this observation. Even a former senior Trump official who worked on Operation Warp Speed, the program that successfully accelerated vaccine development, acknowledges that DeSantis' anti-vax 180 is good politics. Trump himself has drawn boos at his rally when he mentions the vaccines. There is a whole contingent of the GOP that don't like vaccines, the former official says. Those familiar with DeSantis' inner circle say his vaccine stance is indeed driven by politics, not science. There's no medical people involved in this. Someone with knowledge of DeSantis' advisors says it's all political people. Now, a couple of those TV doctors, those people are in his orbit, but this is not engineered by the scientific side of the house. His goal, insiders say, is to tack to Trump's right and peel off anti-vaxxers whose votes would prove decisive in the Republican presidential primaries next year. Now, that is something that's happening, and Trump himself needs, because he can successfully say, a number of things that come out about the vaccine, and I didn't enforce any mandates. I wanted to keep the lockdowns from happening and that kind of thing. And he needs to keep that rhetoric up, I think, in order to be successful and denounce the Operation Warp Speed thing, which was presented to him by like Fauci and Birx and CDC and that whole thing. The one thing that Trump can really stand on that he did, which was remarkable, was take us out of the WHO, which no president has done. So these are the things that Trump can really say, look, I wasn't paying into that World Health Organization. I got us out of there. And we're not subject to any of their weird treaties where, the WHO says, oh, there's a treaty, we take over with a world virus. It's not a one world government, it's a one world virus. So Trump has some aces up his sleeves that he will need to use, and he needs to get on board with that instead of stubbornly saying, I did the right thing or whatever. That whole thing, that government piece around the vaccine was rifled through so many different aspects internationally, through so many different governments. The COVID op in retrospect is absolutely terrifying, but I say that it's going to be minor leagues compared to what they're going to do with the UFO file. And you heard it here first. Yes.
Matakwe Oyasin, does DJ think they gave Trump COVID for an attempted COG takeover?
Yeah, this is something I did a show with Dr. Farrell on this, and I think there's no question that because Trump did the unusual thing at the end of his term after the election was over, which he fired his defense secretary, and it was that defense secretary who had crisscrossed in the background and taken on General Van Herk to lead up Northcom, in an unusual move just before the election. So, it seemed like they were looking at this one point in October of saying, look, we don't want to go through all these shenanigans with the ballots and all the rest of it. How about we do this? We call continuity of government, and then we have an election after Trump is out. That's what they were leaning into doing. And, they had all sorts of weird things going on there in relation to Pelosi and all the rest of it. What's interesting is they actually called continuity of government during J6. Not a lot of people talk about this, but Pence, of all people, talked about this. And interestingly enough, Pelosi sent a car to pick up Pence to bring him to a secure COG location during J6, and Pence did not get in. So he didn't want to participate in the COG thing. That's very odd, as strange as everything is around Pence and how they're trying to tout him as the Republican that can take down Trump and all the rest of it. The fact that he didn't get in, I think, is very telling about he knew that there was an op afoot there. And we see more and more about that op coming out every day. Okay. Let's just read a couple of those things from Turley's article so I can say for sure that I got some of this in. Alvin Bragg searches for his criminal Kalasa. And Kalasa is this kind of mythical place that he uses as a kind of funny thing here. Below is my column in the New York Post on the continued drama in Manhattan over the possible Trump indictment. Alvin Bragg may still secure an indictment, but the reports of divisions on the grand jury have captivated the press. Donald Trump remains Bragg's political manifest destiny, even if there is no legal landfall in sight. Okay, this is the column. Okay. Despite similar widespread doubts over the existence of a viable state crime, Alvin Bragg continues in his quest. While an indictment was expected this week, the grand jury looking into former President Donald Trump will go another week amid reports of opposition in the grand jury over what is viewed as a weak case. Yeah, can you say it's a completely non-existent case? It's ridiculous. But this is the kind of political punishment that we're seeing taking place. It's the weaponization of the legal system. The problem is that Bragg has long been searching for a crime in the criminal code to fulfill his pitch during his campaign that he was the man for voters who wanted to bag Trump. The falsification of business records in reference to a $130,000 payment to porn star Stormy Daniels might have been a possibility, but it lacked two things. First, it expired as a chargeable misdemeanor after 2 years, and that was roughly 5 years ago. Okay, talk about a non-starter. Bragg himself scoffed at the theory and stopped the investigation when he came into power. Two prosecutors, Carrie Dunn and Mark Pomerantz, then resigned, and Pomerantz took what some of us view as a highly unprofessional and improper act of publishing a book on the case against Trump, a person who is still under investigation and not charged, let alone convicted of any crime. The pressure campaign worked, and Bragg pushed the dubious theory to a grand jury. Bragg has Michael Cohen, a former lawyer to Trump, but Cohen's a disbarred lawyer. He is a convicted felon and one of the most repellent figures with a long history of false statements. Then things got even worse when the lawyer for his star witness came forward with more than 300 emails contradicting his testimony. I mean, this is really one of the biggest blowouts in history. It's such a pathetic attempt to just get this photo op of arresting Trump. Another letter on behalf of Cohen to the Federal Election Commission also surfaced that expressly contradicted his claims. It's over, for any sensible, normal legal situation. It never should have happened, but after this, it's over. Even Democrats are hard-pressed to defend the reported basis for the indictment, and Senator Chuck Schumer declined to express his support for the effort. Think about that. Chuck Schumer is probably the most corrupt Senate Majority Leader in history. And the idea that he won't get behind this thing, forget it. Trump has said for years that the Democrats have weaponized the criminal justice system against him, and Bragg just gave him proof positive to support that claim. With this raw political persecution, Bragg fulfilled the narrative of Trump, who was rising in the polls at the very time that Biden is plunging. Turley's not a Republican political pundit at all. He is, somebody who comments on legal matters. So this is, everyone's seeing this for what it is. As I said, it looks like they're in a deep swing shift to try to get it back to the classified documents thing, which is also a weak case. The other thing that they have going on is a case in Georgia, and that case has kind of blown up because the juror in that case went on CNN and started talking about it. So, that's probably illegal, would be my guess, but she also said all kinds of bizarre things that made her look like a lunatic. So the cases against Trump, everything during his presidency, previous to him getting in, remember the CIA lined up for him not to get in, and on the way out, people try to get him out with the 25th Amendment because they were afraid of what he was going to do. Whatever it is that Trump represents is just a dire threat to that deep state establishment. There's no question about that, whether you are a fan of Trump's or not. The question is, what is the nature of the thing that you need to peel these people off the ceiling about Trump? And I'm telling you, the evidence points strongly to a couple of different areas, but the UFO file is crucial, because the UFO file piece, if the deep state considers themselves superior because they have it and someone else is on their level and is willing to use it, that knowledge, then he represents basically an existential threat to the entire thing that they've set up over the course of the past 8 decades. So let's think about that. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Deep tonight into the continuity of government program and emergency powers. We will take your questions here shortly, and we're doing okay on time. I'm probably going a little over, but let's get a couple more things on this UFO piece in so I can kind of round this out nicely. Boy, I have more here still. By the way, Deutsche Bank is another one that sank today, and UBS stocks sank as a fear of European banking crisis. Now, that's over there. So a lot of these things that we're seeing, they need to get their act together. In the middle of all this, they may try to ride in this white swan idea of the central bank digital currency as the savior for it. If they peddle that notion to you, just completely and utterly reject it, because financial transaction freedom is exactly the thing that we need to keep this from becoming a police state. I wanted to point out a couple of crossovers here in this process. Now, I've pointed out Marco Rubio. I've pointed out Ruben Gallego, who's now running for senator. He's a congressman from Arizona. His ex-wife, now ex-wife, it was the mayor of Phoenix. Phoenix, of course, the town that had the Phoenix Lights, great city. Gallejo's very unusual. I'm going to get into Gallego. I have some disturbing things to show you about Ruben Gallego tonight. And, this kind of identity change that he had since he was over here at Harvard studying crowd control, psychological methods for crowd control. It becomes a very disturbing story. And this is why we need a real laser focus on the people who are bringing the UFO piece forward in Congress and in the Senate. Kirsten Gillibrand from New York, the senator from New York, was in a scandal over the NXIVM cult. And Keith Raniere, who ran that cult, in prison for 40 years for kind of sexual torture and things that he did in the cult and the trafficking of women. Then her father-in-law being a bigwig in British aerospace for a number of decades. So suddenly she comes out and she's all like, I'm in favor of the UFO revelation, and all these people suddenly come out. I've never heard anything from these people about anything relating to the UFO file. What are they talking about? What's going on here? Marco Rubio? Marco Rubio wants to bomb Iran. What does he have to do with UFOs? So it's strange. I'm telling you, the neocon piece going into the UFO threat thing is very strange. In the middle of it, Marco Rubio says, advanced objects demonstrating advanced technology are routinely flying over our restricted or sensitive airspace, posing a risk to both flight safety and national security. Okay, so there's that whole UFO threat thing. Gary Nolan chimes in. Gary Nolan is the Stanford professor who they've tapped now to be the guys like, oh, I've been studying UFOs, and guess what? I'm a contactee too. Well, the other thing that you are is someone who for over a decade has been working with the Central Intelligence Agency. So it's another CIA operation around this UFO file, as if there weren't enough of them. And what he says is, thank you, Senator Rubio and Ryan Graves, for your leadership. Look, this is what we're seeing. Here's the other thing on Gary Nolan also, who I think is slated to replace Elizondo in many ways around this UFO threat piece. He's a little more level-headed. He's a scientist after all. But also, we see the CIA people all saying, like Semivan and Ramirez and all these CIA people come out, oh, I was abducted. Suddenly, they want the CIA people to be the experts on abduction, not average people who've had those strange experiences, whatever they may be, involving the UFO file. So what happened was Nolan, it turned out, and I've reported on this program, has ties with Fauci and high fives him online. You're doing great and all this stuff. So what you're looking at is a CIA person in league with Dr. Fauci who wants to be in charge of the UFO file. So what happens? Well, this guy has to be on the Tucker Carlson show, right? And that's what they do. They roll him out in the Tucker Carlson show. And what's funny is in an interview, Tucker Carlson is talking about how Nolan got on his show. And he said, yeah, this guy kept calling up. He was a Stanford professor, and he kept calling up my assistant saying, I need to come on this show. So this is how the CIA think. They're pushing onto the network saying, hey, I have a credential. I can talk about this far out stuff. And Fox is just eating it up. But they're not getting to the real thing, and they're not getting to the potent thing. They're just getting to the CIA operation. And in the meantime, people like Tucker or Megyn Kelly, who's an ex-Fox person, or these other shows that spun off of Fox or CNN, they don't know anything about the UFO file. So whatever these CIA credentialed people come on there and tell them, they accept. And this is why we're seeing this weird, very strange wave, including the idea of UFO shoot downs and all this other junk. Okay, remember where this came from, which was the New York Times article where Leslie Kean, whose uncle, Governor Thomas Kean, ran the 9/11 Commission. She put out Elizondo as a whistleblower, ex-Pentagon whistleblower who ran a UFO file program. He didn't run a UFO file program. That's been proven. 2, he's not a whistleblower. And 3, he never left the government. So that was all a hoax. Now, I've been telling you that for years. Now it's in traditional media. The New York Post did a whole article on it. Todd Farley. And I'm just going to read you a couple of quick things there because I think it's important, because these people, TTSA spent $50 million brainwashing people in this field. And, I heard from very high level, like the top UFO investigator people who would come to me and say, you're going to be made to look foolish by going against TTSA. They changed their whole persona. It was amazing to me. And it's not even that I take it personally or whatever, but the ridiculousness of this thing. If you could just apply any kind of journalistic sense to it, anyone could have been able to see through it. And this is the stuff that we reported on. Okay. And some people did see through it. Okay. From the article, you ready? So ATIP, a Pentagon UFO program that never officially existed, and Elizondo, the man who officially wasn't its director, stole the limelight for 5 years. That's true. 2017, basically to the present, this thing, until the Elizondo story has collapsed. Now they're plugging in Nolan and these other people. Chris Mellon is still flying around, and even Elizondo is going to take another stab at it. They're plugging them into all the network shows and all the rest of it. Well, I'm sorry, but as we can see, even in this article, everything that they said turned out to be a fraud. Meanwhile, the jilted and uncredited members of OSAP refused to give up their quest for aliens. Now, OSAP was the original program that, was running with $22 million to try to get some kind of aerospace defense thing. It was a weird research thing, and basically none of the reports around OSAP even get, they're all 1 inch deep. If you go just a little bit further, you're going to find Bob Bigelow involved. You're going to find aerospace involved. You're going to find the CIA involved. Senator Harry Reid, who was the senator, after all, of Nevada. And what was he running? What was he covering up? Area 51. So this stuff was all in the mix. And so when this guy came out and said, I ran ATIP, there was no ATIP. So when he went and dealt with people who are in our field, like the UFO alternative research field, like Richard Dolan or George Knapp or any of these people, and he sat down and said, I was the leader of ATIP, then now those people should say, I'm sorry that I presented this guy who was lying, that he said he was the head of ATIP, and he wasn't. 1, he wasn't a whistleblower, and 2, he didn't run any program because there wasn't anything called ATIP. And then eventually he admitted himself, well, it was an activity. It wasn't a paid program. Well, baseball is an activity. So, the way that they rolled him out. So basically, as a counterintelligence person, they sent him out with a lie story and the media gobbled it up. But we've been stuck with it for 5 years, took up all the oxygen in the field, and it was all a lie. Now, these are the things that we reported on. Now the mainstream media is picking up on it. Let's get a little more. There's actually a couple of good pieces here. Hang on just a second. Elizondo touted himself as the director of the Pentagon UFO program. This is from the New York Post article. ATIP, including on shows like Unidentified, but the Pentagon said he had no responsibilities for ATIP. And exclusively reported by the Post, the Pentagon didn't actually have an official UFO program called ATIP. Well, it was exclusively reported on my show, actually, way before the Post reported it. And Elizondo was not its director. That's in print. So if ATIP existed and Elizondo was the director of that program, he would sue the New York Post, because there it is. That's the article. Let me read it again. As exclusively reported by the New York Post, the Pentagon didn't actually have an official UFO program called ATIP, and Elizondo was not its director. So that's the end of the story right there, because this media organization now, which has been able to weigh out the facts after 5 years that we've been working on since 2018, they finally have gone on the record and said it. And like I said, if they were telling a lie and if he ran that program, Elizondo would sue them. They'd have to take this article down. Didn't happen. In 2019, the Pentagon released a statement saying Elizondo had no responsibilities with ATIP, a program which they also said wasn't created to investigate UFOs. The official statement contradicted the claims of the New York Times and Elizondo, but hardly any press outlets bothered to report it. Excellent point. Why don't they come back and say, oh, you know what, this guy that we touted around here for the last 5 years saying he was a UFO Pentagon whistleblower, it was a lie. But you don't hear that part, because then you can see the shoddy journalism that they've been doing. Okay, a little bit further. In 2021, Elizondo filed a complaint with the Department of Defense Inspector General's office, claiming that the Pentagon denying his role with ATIP was part of a disinformation campaign to discredit him. But recently released documents from the DoD state no evidence was found to support Elizondo's claim of any such campaign. Danny Sheehan, we've seen him before, Elizondo's lawyer, confirmed with the Post that the DoD dismissed Elizondo's complaint. That's the end of that, everybody. Elizondo, who declined to comment on this story, would become a minor celebrity, appearing on primetime cable shows starring the History Channel, featured on Tucker Carlson, and Megyn Kelly on CNN, landing a book deal. The UFO hysteria began with that New York Times story, is now culminated with Congress taking official action to hunt UFOs. Okay. This is interesting also, I think, when it comes to reporting on this, which is back in 1997. This is why having that background on it and being able to string these dates together and what the official positions of the agencies involved have been is very crucial. The CIA in 1997 declared that they were behind the UFOs that were being cited in the 1950s and 60s. In fact, they said CIA admits government lied about UFO sightings. That's the New York Times in 1997. So what do we have? We have a group saying all that stuff that was going on about the government saying we don't know what those UFOs are. They're saying we're the ones who created them. Okay, later they change around, right? They switch in an Orwellian fashion to a completely different side, and they're like, oh, we don't know what's out there, and we need all this money for a new UFO defense office in order to fight these bad aliens. And Gary Nolan, our guy, is studying them, and Elizondo, all this junk. So these people are just lying for different positions. So the grand takeaway: the Central Intelligence Agency and counterintelligence officers are trained to lie. And so fundamentally, when you get counterintel people working around this, they are the best liars. That's why they're counterintel people, because it's important to have that skill when you're dealing with intelligence. So the idea of getting the truth about UFOs from the CIA is insane. So all those media outlets that ran around with this story and all those different groups that were touting Elizondo, and all the UFO researchers who went along with this junk, should all come forward and say, we got it wrong, and we were lied to, and, we're not going to be part of this circus anymore. And the thing is, what kind of credibility do you have if you don't? That's the question. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, deep there and on the UFO file. We need that spirit behind a totally new kind of way to approach the UFO thing, because UFO cases are real. People have those experiences. Pilots see them. We've been dealing with this intergenerationally for a century, at least, and probably as far back as humanity can remember. There's another factor involved, and it involves advanced technology. And starting from the 20th century forward, the difference in the technology has become very obvious, that there's something operating side by side with us as we start to get up towards that level of technology. That's the real side of the UFO file thing. I'm no UFO skeptic. The whole show is based around some level of the UFO file. The idea, though, is this thing, the CIA false disclosure thing, that they've put tremendous amounts of money and intelligence and resources behind to create a threat, that needs to be exposed. And the researchers who go along with it, for whatever reason, and I've seen some pretty weird reasons, but whatever it happens to be, that whole thing needs to splinter off, because, the CIA disclosure thing is finished as far as legitimacy is concerned. Although that's going to be the thing, you're going to see these types of shows that are purporting to be, edgy news shows, as I've said, like Tucker and things like that. They're going to sit down there with CIA people talking about the UFO file. It's absurd. We just need that fundamental break in relation to viewing things that way. And with that, Miss Olivia,
ready for questions?
Yes.
Okay, first off, let's start with this. Neva Moore, DJ Victory Lap, run with it. You're right.
What I've wanted to do with this is present to you the facts on the ground about what these people were up to, and prevent them from launching a UFO threat program on an unsuspecting public. So I think we've been on this journey together, educating each other, and we're going in a totally different and good, unique direction with this. And trust me, the UFO file is going to be on the table for the 2024 election. So it's going to be a crucial factor in all this. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to give you a block here. So SM says, hi all, I've watched several of the old videos. Great stuff, but just one question. What is the overall theory of DJ? Gillenjoy R say he tells the truth. That's the theory. Shelley says, overall theory, UFOs and false flags run by corporate globalists and dark occultists are used to gain eventual total global powers.
That's good.
What would you, would you agree with that?
Yeah, excellent interpretation. I think here's what you need to understand, which is that at the core of your political research should be the UFO file. Because the UFO file embodies, if you look at the Kennedy assassination, I brought forward information through a historical figure from Watergate, drawing that information from the top spy in the CIA that President Kennedy was assassinated over the UFO file. So, that wasn't able to get through that gridlock. And they surrounded, they had all this stuff about the mafia and its junks, ridiculous nonsense. The mafia can't alter autopsies, and the mafia can't make the media go to sleep, and things of this nature. So, but something so big as that battle over the UFO file gets into this realm where we live in two different realities around things like the JFK assassination or 9/11 or other deep events. So, what you can say in relation to the UFO file is there is a mystical aspect involved, but there's something inside the UFO file, which is the X technology. And the thing that they study in the X technology is this apotheum feature. And the apotheum feature, for all intents and purposes, I made the word up. But there was a theme.
Did you make it up, or it came to you in a dream?
No, it did actually come to me that way.
There you
but
go.
I'm saying, it does. What's strange, though, is you can find references to a word like this in history around this. So there's something strange about that. But anyway, dream or no dream, apotheum is a factor of a kind of reality disrupting physics. And so whenever you get around, this is one of the amazing things. I was fortunate enough when I was very young, I had a friend who worked with John Mack. And she told me that one of the things that Mack was doing was training people in astral travel to protect themselves from abduction experiences. And I thought, that's really, that's different than like setting up cameras to see if you're getting abducted. But this is a totally different thing, and it had me thinking about it differently. Then I started to list all the strange things that happen around the abduction experience, or even sightings of UFOs. But there's all the time-lapse stuff. So time changes. People go through walls when they're being abducted. So all the physics there are upside down. And everything seems to be turned upside down, including the fact that in certain places where UFOs land, plants won't grow. It shuts off power stations. Vehicles are never the same again. Compasses change. So there's all these aspects from the interaction of this thing. Now, if you get around certain types of Tesla technology or Keeley technology, and some of the things with Keeley harken back to the mystery schools and some of the technology that was kept from an earlier period, it seems to have some memory of this technology getting out of hand, which is the story of Atlantis, this whole memory of a gigantic conflagration of humanity, an inundation. And there's a story, there's a whole lineage story of this in the mystery schools from the work of Edgar Cayce and Rudolf Steiner. So when we get around that, we're looking at a different history and a memory of this reality distorting physics that took place through something. And it seems like the same technology that was developed in the mystery schools, the effect that takes place is the same thing that happens when people encounter UFOs. So whatever that is, that apotheum effect is crucial, and it represents why you have things like ex-protect groups, because they haven't mastered the ability to utilize the technology involved without some chance. Now, I'm sure they've lowered the chance over the decades of it boomeranging. And so there's a lot, it's another show to go really much deeper than that on it. But fundamentally, there's a mystical and a secrecy aspect involved with the UFO file that drives a great deal of secrecy on the geopolitical side. Yes.
Amarillo Gunrunners. Would you characterize Ex-Protect as the deep state, or are they two separate entities?
Well, here's how Professor Scott defined the deep state. The bottom level, this is what people get upside down very often. The bottom level is organized crime. Organized crime is not up here manipulating the agencies. Organized crime is on the bottom, being given instructions by the agencies. The other levels, the Central Intelligence Agency and its relationship to international finance. Then the groups that the CIA contracts, Booz Allen Hamilton, where they outsource the intelligence. And those groups run around doing all sorts of illegal things. And then the next level up is those levels of oil companies and technology companies and others. And then it is the financial levels, and then the management of those financial levels. That all constitutes the deep state portion. My own sort of investigations around aerospace showed me that the aerospace wing, as Jim Garrison discovered during his investigation of the Kennedy assassination, is deeply involved. And there's a reason for that. It's because aerospace has the greatest access to the UFO technology. Now, here's the other thing about Ex-Protect. Their assignment is all about making sure that those UFO secrets don't come out. So it's not like, when we hear about, oh, the government's going to give you UFO disclosure, they're going to talk about aliens. You're not going to get anything near the truth because their whole thing is about secrecy. They might come up with a narrative that they want to get out there, some narrative for control. Either there's a threat out there, or Space Brothers, or AI, or whatever, but it's none of it's the truth. So the Central Intelligence Agency of the government, you'll never get the truth from them around UFOs. That's the first rule. The next thing is, who are the people in X-Protect? Well, we know that they operate in kind of a shadowy corridor between the aerospace wing of the military industrial complex and the intelligence wing. They're a very specific unit. And by the way, they operate with psychic faculties. They operate with mystical faculties. And one of the things that we pointed out in a recent episode is that they may have used a group of Sami mystics to create the whole Men in Black piece. So we've got a lot of, and that's based on very, very deep research by John Keel, who was one of the deepest researchers around the sort of supernatural aspect of the UFO file. What we did is, I was able to, with his one realization of showing around these pictures of what does a man in black look like, he showed them, because a lot of them were making vague references to, they look kind of Asian. It wasn't specific enough. So he took all these representation of different races, and everyone kept stopping on the Sami figure. So, and that gets us into a totally interesting side of the world, but I highly recommend that episode, X series episode. I think it's 145, 144. So that piece, by bringing that alive, suddenly, we've got a whole piece around X-Protect. We're understanding even those weird stories around the Men in Black part, instead of just being like, what do you mean they disappeared? There's such a classic story on the record that Dan Aykroyd, of all people, when he encountered these, Men in Black, well, he was working on a UFO show for the Sci-Fi Channel, and he was building up this great show. It was going quite well. And they didn't want him doing this. So he came downstairs on a break, and in his own recollection of the story, he's talking to Britney Spears on the phone about Saturday Night Live, and he turns around, and this is Dan Aykroyd, he's being serious. He sees these guys in kind of 1940s garb with a shiny black car, and they look polished and brand new, but they're giving him a really negative look and just staring at him. And then he turns around, and when he looks back, they're gone. So this is a modern kind of re-inhabitation of that whole story. And we've seen lots and lots of versions of that story over time. But I think now we have a better handle on how and who they are when we think about the group that's involved. Now, the X-Protect piece works on levels where they discredit investigators, researchers who are doing certain types of material. There's a period of time where you can see them using lethal action against certain researchers as well. And I think Morris Jessup is the most classic case of that. And, later on you try to, there's all this stuff about Jessup where people will say, well, he killed himself in a park because he was unhappy with life. No. And this is an interesting thing that's been coming up a lot, which is the revisionism around certain aspects. And, where they just try to say, well, you remember that Lonnie Zamora story in New Mexico? Well, guess how? Some university professor came forward and said, oh, my students did that, No, your students didn't have anti-gravity technology and scare police officers, and, they didn't have the ability to do that. So, we get a lot of this weird debunking thing that happens. But if we have a really clear sight for it, we can see that there's a group operating, which they don't want the public discovering the UFO file truth on their own. Let's put it that way. Yes.
Ray Story says, were the Blues Brothers dressed as Men in Black then?
I don't know, but it's a good movie.
Okay. And on that note, Chris Lothian says, do you think that Elon Musk plays any part in the UFO threat at all? Maybe by transmitting holograms. I'm reading the wrong one, but I'll go for it anyway. Or eerie space sounds.
All right. Well, since you mentioned holograms, You've done me a great service,
Okay.
because I had a whole piece here about holograms. And are you ready? Our friend Bill Gates is involved. I kid you not. Hold on.
We're all in suspense.
Oh, boy, does this get good. All right. So there's a company out there called Lightfield Lab. Okay, interesting story. Lightfield Lab raises $50 million to bring solid light holograms to the real world. And, it's this company. There's a lot of companies that are into holograms or whatever. And it's becoming the thing. Part of this was engineered with an idea that if there's like an incredible singer like Elvis, you could bring him back to life to do concerts and things like that. That's one of the cover stories for this type of technology. But you can imagine the many different ways they could use it. Here's a couple of key things from the article that got me. Lightfield Lab is building the future of immersive experiences. We're pleased to support the team in bringing true holograms to life, said Dr. Song-Yi Yoon, Chief Strategy Officer. Being able to see, deliver, and interact with 3D content without any assistance, peripheral devices, will substantially advance the consumer adoption of solid light, not just in the entertainment space, but also in the way in which we interact and collaborate through remote technologies. Founded in 2017 by Litro veterans Carafin, Brendan Bevensey, and Ed Ibe, Lightfield Lab has raised a total of $85 million, backed by Bill Gates and Gates Frontier. Now, why is Bill Gates deeply involved in a hologram company? Let's get a quick look at the kind of holograms that they can build. Maybe we can determine that. And we might see that Gates has switched his idea of doing the COVID op as the way to bring everyone under his mysterious spell, and moved on to participating in the UFO threat hologram. Let's look at some of these. This is completely and utterly projected hologram. And it looks very much like a car. But if you put your hand through it, there's nothing there. Show you some of the weirder projects. I actually watched the demonstration of their projects, and they are a very interesting company, and I'm sure they're very innovative in this. But take a look at that. This little character is called the Creator of Light. I kid you not. He looks like a Mayan death mask. I mean,
yeah.
Let's just get real. All right, next up, you ready? This guy in his little virtual reality 8th sphere intro, he says, I am the creator of light. And what I'm going to do actually
Light
is
or life? Light?
light.
Okay.
Yes. What I'll do with this creator of light god guy is I will put up the link to their actual demonstration on Vimeo on my Twitter feed when I'm done with this show. Of course, they also deal with our friends, the dinosaurs. They've got that going on. And most recently, they had the Lightfield Lab raises $50 million to bring solid light holograms into the real world. This is where these guys are going. And they had the big and huge investment from Gates himself. And, Gates has terrific cover on this to just say, oh, well, I'm a tech guy and I want to put money behind this. But, you put a few things together with Gates, the Gates Foundation and the whole, vaccine insanity, and then buying farmland and now the holograms. I mean, he's kind of covering his bets in a lot of different directions. But the idea of using holograms for a UFO threat, and even the idea that, Tic Tac and all that other stuff were holograms projected on radar to scare the bejesus out of pilots, so that they would have these stories to come forward with, are all very logical. By the way, I don't think they need holograms to do that. I think they have the real thing. I think they have redeveloped that technology, the UFO technology. And so I think we can make our own at this point for sure. But I think the holograms probably make things a whole lot easier. Instead of building fleets and fleets and fleets of this stuff, they can just make some real hardcore originals and then use holograms for the rest.
Actually, that's really deep.
Yeah.
Because their whole ilk, it's all about it's never about creating anything real because it takes time, it takes integrity, it takes heart. It's all about cheating and finding another way. It's the
Right.
stairway to heaven, kind of any way to trick the system. You can't work with nature harmoniously.
That's really true.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what I will say is I think that's one to watch, shall we say. And the holograms themselves are absolutely fascinating. I watched maybe about like 15 or 20 minutes worth of their videos, but wow. Quite exceptional. Yes, Miss Olivia.
God's Loyal Servant 1111 says ninth sphere art.
There's a reason why it's an 8th sphere, so I'm going to keep you in the 8 for that one. Yeah. What do you
Okay, this is what I was going to get to. So Simone Nyman said, Gary Nolan is a virologist, and this is a concern as he could push the danger of an alien virus. And he had an outfit like yours, DJ, on Fox, or was he dressed as a man in black?
It's pretty interesting because this guy, he never dresses like that, but on Fox, I got a number of people saying, I think this guy's dressed up like Dark Journalist on the Tucker Show. What's going on here?
A lot of people are starting to dress in dark suits. Have you noticed this? You're a trendsetter.
That's it. I'll take it. What I want to do with people like Nolan and their ilk is I want them to see that whatever they're being told in the background about how they can pull this off, the fact that it's out there through the ideas room, through the things that we're doing on this program, it's not going to work. So trying to do the UFO threat thing, I don't care if you have Fox or CNN on your side. Too many people in the know right here, listening right now. Look, it took 5 years to see through the TTSA thing, but pretty much everyone knows, except for the diehards, that thing, is a hoax. And so the CIA UFO threat thing, it's not going to fly with conversations like this going on. That's a fact. So, the ideas room, the reach of the conversation is vast and it's potent. And this is the thing about potency. You might get this fluff on the top and, people with millions of dollars behind Fox production and all the rest of it. Look, the potency, it's like Garrison said, one man armed with the truth constitutes a majority. There's a lot of potency in this work. And that's something I have no reservation about stating, because I know how potent the work is that we present and that the guests we have on the show who present it. It's not going to get, that's what we're looking for. We're in search of that. So it's only going to get more potent as we go by. Yes.
M. Rivera System says DJ needs a white hat. And that puts me in mind of JFK about the hat that he would not wear to crush his gorgeous hair like yours.
He almost did it, and they were trying to dog him into it in Dallas, and he was about to put it on, but he realized it's going to mess up that incredible Irish hair, and he said, I'll put it on in the White House on Monday.
Exactly. On that note, Jonathan Free says, wasn't Kennedy the last president to have a full briefing on the UFO file, or did he ever get his hands on it? Guess we'll never know.
Oh, I think even Trump said that he got a briefing on it. How deep they allow those presidents to go and how much of that. See, the thing is, my question is, could Trump brief them when he got in? See what I mean? This is the problem with Trump. And not because Trump is a super genius, but because his uncle was, the protege of Vannevar Bush, who controlled the UFO file. So if his uncle had that, and then they sent him in to examine Tesla's papers around Tesla's death ray and all these other things, that's a lot of information. That's a heck of a lot of information that John Trump had. So if John Trump had that information, shared it with his nephew, and Trump would make these speeches saying, well, my uncle told me about nuclear before there was nuclear and things of this nature. There's some relationship that he would talk about. At times he would bring it up rather randomly, almost to say, you know what I'm talking about. So we've had conversation with Trump talking about flying cars and things recently, and how there's going to be a whole different technology. He talked about how our jets were invisible, and then they try to make fun of that or whatever. But he would stick to it and say, no, they are invisible. So there's something weird. Trump postured at times to say, I know the stuff. And I think this is part of the problem with Trump. And it's not like Trump can come out and say, I know the UFO file. But I think it's a significant factor operating in the background. That is his level of knowledge. Look, when we talk about Roy Cohn, also, we're not just talking about someone involved in the mafia. He is involved, and he operates inside of the DISC, Defense Industrial Security Command aspect of the Torbett document. It was a big release of information, much more important than the Pentagon Papers, in my opinion, in 1970. And they list Roy Cohn deep in this aerospace piece. Well, then Roy Cohn becomes the political mentor to Trump. So those types of connections are not things that we need to guess at. We know they have the connections. The question is, how deep did the sharing of information goes? In my opinion, the sharing of information went all the way deep. And that's why Nixon is involved with Trump in the 80s and telling him, you got to run for president, boy. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is a special report we put together around the blackouts, Trump indictment, the emergency powers, continuity of government, going deep on all of them. We're going to take some more of your questions and then call it a night, because we have a big 2-part special coming up for you next Friday and Saturday of the X series. And that will be episode 148, I believe.
Okay.
Yes.
Najat Madri wants to know, how deep does RFK Jr. know the UFO file?
I have no idea. I can tell you RFK Sr. knew the UFO file very well. Phil Corso is on the record, the military official who wrote the day after Roswell, saying that he briefed Jack and Bobby all the time on the UFO piece, and that they wanted reports about what we were sending after them, and they didn't want them shot at, and they also wanted to know what kind of information we were getting on that. And what he was telling them was that the X-15, which Walter Dornberger had designed, which includes the X technology, that it was getting some real good pictures of UFOs. But, this X-15, which still holds some speed records for a manned space plane 60 years later, it's kind of strange, that was built to chase UFOs, according to Corso. And these are the types of briefings that he was giving to the Kennedy brothers. So I think that tells you a lot there. But in terms of Junior, look, Bobby Kennedy he's an excellent candidate. He's a very careful thinker. He has shown a lot of courage. He understands the legacy of his family in politics. And I think he would make an excellent candidate and a great president. The question is, can he get through that gauntlet of the Democratic machine and the deep state forces that just are holding Stepford Biden in there? That's a great question. I'm not sure we know the answer on that one. But the Kennedy machine is probably the one thing that could smash that. So I hope that in our lifetime we get to see this. If it's happening now, and all signs are that it is, this is going to be an incredible 2024 election. I don't care who tells you that presidential elections don't matter. This one is going to matter. Yes.
The Buddhist of Boston Sports, is the UFO file at the center of politics, basically because they are controlled by archons?
Well, isn't that interesting? Well, you have to say there are beings associated with the UFO file. There's something going on there. There's some interface there. So, the craft don't operate by themselves. So something is active. Now, I think Gigi Young's work is good for this, which is not to get confused about spiritual hierarchies in relation to aliens. The idea of off-world civilizations, the only way you could regard them would be as peers. And the other piece I think that's important about UFO, they used to call them occupants. The UFO occupants, whoever is operating that could very well be a side-by-side civilization operating in a stealth fashion here on Earth. So you may not be looking at an alien, just alien in the sense. We've put forward some very unusual material in the Edgar Cayce readings about the automatons, and that the Atlanteans had engineered, robots, that they had engineered these things. So the interference in humanity's evolution is at the heart of the mystery school teachings in the Cayce work and in Steiner's work. So what happened to those things? I find it very interesting that there's that whole thing about Edgar Cayce talking about, someone asked him the question, well, what did the Atlantean ships, what did they look like? This is Cayce talking in 1938. And he says, well, they're like what Ezekiel described, but it was a much later date when Ezekiel saw them. So somebody kept the technology, and he's suggesting that whatever people were seeing, it's not ancient aliens with some ET coming in and some Bible person mistaking them for gods. Casey's saying, he's getting much edgier. He's saying, no, the Atlanteans had that technology. Somebody kept it, and then later Ezekiel sees it, and he describes it. So in that description, he actually talks about, there's this terrible blue crystal involved, So we need to maybe take a step back and say, did we miss the whole advanced lost civilization part when we were describing this? It's interesting because I think in some ways the UFO threat piece, one of the things that they're going for a lot now is the USO part. They're like, there's a threat under the oceans, So they're going to go into space and the ocean, wherever that threat carries them, You're not going to get the truth, but they're going to get, the threat either from space or under, the inner Earth, Remember on Gaia TV, the Wilcock and Good used to talk. They used to go to the inner Earth to get massaged by princesses, inner Earth princesses. So yeah, when the lies start, there's no stopping. Go ahead.
BK, a question. Was COVID released to stop Trump? If so, what to expect in 2024? UFO, superbugs, fungus, etc.?
Well, I don't think they could have stopped Trump without COVID in 2020. But I think it had this purpose of consolidation of the globe. And I think there are factors there. Look, I want to say a couple of things here right off the bat. One, if you were to talk about Trump in 2020 and 2021 and now, sure, but the censorship level was so heavy around Trump, and the fear engulfed radio, it engulfed newspapers, it engulfed websites, it engulfed social media networks, everything. What is so terrifying about Donald Trump to these people? What is making them lose it? They're not afraid of DeSantis. And hell, DeSantis, has more rules, has more things against COVID, and more exposure around the whole thing medically. His own Surgeon General states the dangers involved. So Trump, forget it. I mean, Trump he ran Operation Warp Speed with Fauci and all the rest of it. Why are they afraid of Trump? What's the problem? Think about it, really. And it gets us into a weird place because it doesn't make sense politically for them to do it.
Well, what's your answer?
Well, what I want to put across, rather than trying to answer it, my answer, runs to the UFO file.
Mhm.
There's no question. And the information between Roy Cohn, Nixon, and his uncle, and maybe somebody else. But the idea that somebody is on the same level as the deep state and knows what they know, I think is a game changer that they cannot allow, because it could unravel everything that they've put in place. Not that Trump is some superhero that can do all these things. It's just their battle with, they'd have to share the spotlight with him. And we don't know, his sense of America, the whole America first thing, may be such a problem for them with what they want to do with consolidating a one world government that gets rid of the Constitution and makes America the homeland and that whole thing. There's too many factors, but what I want to say personally from my own experience is, look, they still censor my stuff because of Trump. How extraordinary is that? So that tells me that it's a little bit different than something else. That you can cover Ron DeSantis, you can cover certain types of things. The only type of censorship that came anywhere close was the COVID censorship. So something in combination there, and we start to get hot on the trail. For my money, the legitimate UFO story versus all this fluff is something that scares these people to death. That's why they've been hiding it for 80 years. Yes.
Jimmy Lyle Kennemer, DJ, how long can this information embargo last?
Forever. It can last forever. Unless we share our own information and bring it to a different level. We've seen, look, let me start with the UFO field, because it's something in the alternative research arena that we can clearly name and we clearly know how it's been used. So those people who were spent their lives, I want truth from the government, and, the government's hiding stuff and all this kind of thing. Then when the government through the CIA shows up with all this stuff, they all folded, right? So we can see that that's not the way to go, giving into the government on this. So you have secrecy, but you have secrecy in a number of different areas. There's a secret system of finance. There's missing money. There's a black budget money program. There's a secret space program. Those things are true. The UFO files, real. There are real UFOs. There's no question about it. So there's no lie there. It's the interpretation and the projection of a narrative that gets us to the lie on this. So we need to separate those things out. This program is not, things we do in the X series isn't, UFOs don't exist. And, we're not skeptics of that at all. If you go through these programs, I've interviewed and had the top, some of them no longer with us, UFO experts on this program. And I've talked to them privately for years. So I know it's real. I've talked to people who've been abducted, and I'm completely convinced of the reality of the phenomena. The question is the interpretation and the phony CIA disclosure and what they want to do with it, and how there's a threat, and how you need this UFO Defense Office, UFO DOE, and how they get emergency powers, brings in all of the continuity of government information that Professor Scott gave us, because ultimately that's what gives them power, which is something above in the skies. And we got a little taste of it, enough that should have awoken a number of people, with the weird Chinese balloon and then the other shoot downs. By the way, all that debris disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of reality is that? Debris disappearing? Doesn't happen. You can pinpoint anything on this planet with the satellites we have. What happened to the debris of the things that they shot down? They may have never been there in the first place. But the balloon was there, and we saw they got the debris of that. But that was a Chinese balloon. But I'll tell you, in all the history of NORAD, they've never had to shoot down anything. 65 years, nothing on the record. We've never had balloons wandering across the continent of the United States. It's still not explained what that was all about. It is a test run. It's a data gathering exercise. There's no question in my mind that that's what they were using it for. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Peter Bayonne, why even spend time talking about candidates? Voting machines make it pointless.
Well, I understand you saying that, especially with the kind of hijinks that we've seen in the last election. But certainly it does make a difference, because if there's such a press, it becomes harder and harder for them to exploit it across the board. I would love to see us go back to paper ballots. On that, I don't think we can trust digital systems. They're too easy to hack and manipulate. And then groups who hold the software say it's proprietary. You can't check up on us. That's not any way to run a country. So tons and tons of problems there with elections. However, when there's such a wave, and this is the thing that they fear, because it happened to them in 2016, when there's such a wave, it's impossible. You can't rig it. And that's the nature of the problem they face coming up in 2024, because Biden's such a disaster with his foreign policy, with his economic policy, and with his general lack of brain power and the committees running him, that he's become such a kind of a laughing stock for the rest of the world, that they're in trouble with what they want to do. And I think they might think that they can get it through DeSantis, because if you look into his background, he has kind of almost like a John Kerry-ish background. But my guess is, and I've been hearing some things out in independent land about the possibility that DeSantis was set up by them saying, hey, Trump is going down in these indictments and you're going to be home free. So you just, plan to run for president, baby. You're all set. And, but the idea was just to use him to get Trump out of the way and have that battle take place. In the meantime, the desperate Democrats can hang on by a whisker and continue to run with no majorities. And they've done that a lot. I mean, the thing in France is very telling, where this guy is just rifling things in that he makes up himself, and you're getting all these riots in response. And how that plays out, I think, is going to be important for what happens in the future in this country, because emergency powers are fundamentally abhorrent to Constitution-loving citizens. And the Constitution is still the law of the land. Every official, every court official, every police officer, they all have to swear onto that Constitution. And the Constitution does not allow for a fascist dictator to take over under an emergency condition.
Which brings me to my next question.
Yes.
Simone Nyman, America needs COG more than any other country because of the strong Constitution.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting situation. I believe that the continuity of government piece is being raised, because with the things that I was telling you about Biden in Democratic polls being underwater, that's a real big problem for them. And it's only going to get worse. I don't see anything improving his standing. So then what? You're going to run Gavin Newsom? Gruesome Newsom? Well, it's interesting because he was the guy who said, I can make martial law in California if I want to. No, he can't. So, it's an interesting situation. On that note, by the way, I found it quite interesting that they made the mayor of Los Angeles, who, by the way, they changed their own rules so he could stay in 5 years, so he could be in there during the COVID thing. Garcetti, the freak who said that you can't walk. Remember that one? That was one of his edicts. Mm-hmm. Don't walk.
Right, well, no vitamin D.
Yeah. Now he's the ambassador to India. That's what Biden is electing him to be. So you see, you play ball with the deep state and you carry out their fascist edicts. You become an ambassador instead of going to jail. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Special Report. Okay, we're going to take 2 more questions. And I have one last quick thing here to follow up on as well. Miss Olivia, you're up.
These are 2. The gold color says, most Western world leaders are leading like they have a death wish. And Larry Hillman says, it's starting to look like Dr. Strangelove was less of a satire and more of a veiled prophecy.
Well, there's a lot in Dr. Strangelove. All those movies in that period are revealing a great deal for us. I think Dr. Strangelove, for sure. 7 Days in May with the COG commander trying to take over with Roswell on the map behind him, as we pointed out. There's a great deal there. I think that we're in this kind of period of insanity, but we have a point where they still think that they can rifle in this election piece in 2024. So I think we have the room to maneuver here to position ourselves with that election. And if we have people like RFK Jr. and Trump running, it does make a difference. Now, it's not the whole ball game by a long shot, but if we start to open things up on that leadership level, then it'll take a lot out of this consolidation that the deep state is running. So I think there's many things that could happen as we get along here. The important thing is for us to open up this discussion. I swear to God, the people who put in place all of these restrictions and things like that, they must be terrified of a conversation like this that takes place in the ideas room. I mean, I can only imagine what they must be thinking. But for me, yeah, I mean, that's pretty clear. I want to point out a couple of quick things about RFK, and then we'll take your last question, Miss Olivia. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Remember, I want to remind everyone, next Friday is our 2-part piece. It's 2 episodes coming up. It's the X Series anniversary. You don't want to miss it. Friday night at 8 p.m., Saturday night at 8 p.m., March 31st and April 1st. We really look forward to you being there, and some incredible information and surprises for you. So make sure you mark it on your calendar. With all this Trump stuff going on, there was no way we could have done it this week. And let's hope if the shenanigans around him getting arrested, I mean, it's appalling even to talk about it, because it shows that we're in such a fascist situation at this point. And when they raided Mar-a-Lago, that was one kind of fascism, was already bad there. But for the idea that they're going to try to slap the cuffs on this former president on flimsiest charges of all, when they've had presidents who are guilty of all kinds of things, and it's just not done. The way that they're doing this, and that they can weaponize the Justice Department against their political enemies, is a bad period in American history that will be looked back upon, as just this kind of dark ages. But I will say this, that we need to bring forward this message. We need to bring forward the transparency around the political situation, around the UFO file, around some of these deeper things, around that manipulation of these deep events. And this is the period to do it. We have to win this one. So, we're in it to win it. And I'm just happy to be here with all you guys ready to win. Okay. RFK Jr., here's an honest question. Does he have a chance? Well, let's look at some of the coverage since he announced he's going to run. Will fringe Democrats dominate New Hampshire primary? A visit by RFK Jr. points to uncertain times ahead. Okay, and so he's fringe for them. But Stepford Biden, trying to get us into a nuclear war with Russia, that's just fine. Democrats reshuffle makes New Hampshire second to hold primary in 2024, but state leaders push to be first. Here's the battle, and it's rolling out. They've switched it. The DNC has taken this fascist position against their own states and said, no, you're going to run second because Biden needs to win that first one, and South Carolina, he'll win. But like I said last time, he got I think 3 or 4%. He just did a terrible job in New Hampshire, because New Hampshire is a real state. And you have people going door to door and canvassing and stuff like that. They're not going to put up with Stepford Biden. So RFK Jr. would blow him out of the water, and it would create an earthquake right there. This is what they're trying to avoid. So in a way, this battle is playing out in little venues, in little places, but we need to watch that part close. And to the people of New Hampshire, stand up to the DNC. And if they say no debates and you have to be second, not first, even though you've done it this way for decades because it'll benefit Stepford Biden, and they're going to say you're not going to get any money, to do this stuff, tell them to stick their money and that you're going to keep your voting right where it was. And you don't need to change any of that. I can't get out of this episode without sharing some disturbing information about one of these UFO threatsters. And I call them UFO threatsters because they are the people who run around promoting this UFO threat idea. And some of them are in Congress. And Marco Rubio and Kirsten Gillibrand and some others have been involved in this. Now, here's what's interesting about all this. One guy, Ruben Galileo, I've pointed out a few times because he has a very uneven background, in my opinion. Because when he was here at Harvard, he studied crowd control, psychological operations of crowd control. And he got into the military, went to Iraq and did all this stuff and probably used some of that expertise. But I found it strange for him to reemerge as some kind of UFO hero shortly after he became a congressperson. Total lack of focus, lawmaker on a mission to compel Pentagon to take UFOs seriously. There he is. Democratic Representative Ruben Galileo, an Iraq War vet, said he was prepared to kill somebody on January 6th. That is from Politico. And it's a story. They're using the same picture. Interesting. So this guy goes on to talk about this in some disturbing detail and said, Representative Galileo said he was prepared to kill someone if it came to it on January 6th. Well, you're a congressman and you have citizens protesting. What is it that you think gives you the right to kill someone? I mean, I understand in the Iraq War, we put you over there and that was a dangerous situation and you probably had to kill people as part of the war, but do you really think that you can kill a protester? So this is all very, very disturbing. And what's interesting is in Business Insider, they go even further and he gives an interview where he talks about how, he's dropping the F-bomb every other word. And so I can't even really give you a quote of what he says here. But there's something weird and strange that they're doing with Galileo.
Well, you should talk about the the killing technique.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is the weird thing about it. Galileo previously told Insider he would use a pen to stab somebody if that's all that was available. I kid you not. This is a real piece. And
right in the throat.
Now, here's
right?
what's strange. He says, we had pens. I don't give an F. I would have killed all those mother effers to save democracy. F those guys. He told Politico. This is a congressman. Now, let's think about this. These weird, strange threats that he's throwing out there. This guy, out of nowhere, decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take on Kristen Sinema for senator. So now he wants to be the senator of Arizona. Well, what else is in his past? Representative Ruben Galileo made the NDAA amendment on unidentified aerial phenomena. Really? You want these people involved in the UFO file? Senator Kirsten Sinema to be challenged by Democratic Rep. Ruben Galileo. Well, it's interesting, too, because she was a Democrat and she just could not go along with what they were doing. She said, you know what? I'm an independent. And suddenly they started putting out stories and being like, bisexual senators, a big disappointment. You see how fast this group that's operating things behind the scenes will turn on any group, just like they'll turn on the trans group, or they'll turn on the LGBT, or they'll turn on different races or whatever. They have no loyalty anywhere except to their own power. A few things grabbed me about Galileo. On August 7th, 2008, Galileo changed his name from Ruben Marine Lorena to Ruben Galileo. Supposedly, Galileo was a family name and he wanted to adopt it. But interestingly enough, he changed his look and he went to Arizona and he won largely cajoling a Latin audience. So I wonder about the op of Galileo and the nature of him saying this. But I object to his language about American citizens as a sitting official. I object to him running for senator without addressing those comments. And 3, I don't want him anywhere near the UFO file. So if he wants to come on this program and discuss it about why he made those comments, I'd be happy to have him on. But otherwise, he seems like a dangerously unbalanced individual based on those comments. The other thing I want to point out here is Rolling Stone magazine, which used to be the home of the counterculture and all the rest, and started the 60s generation and all the rest. Now they're going after Green Bay Packers quarterback for hanging out with RFK Jr. Aaron Rodgers hangs with vaccine conspiracy theorist RFK Jr. That's Rolling Stone magazine. How far down the ladder have they fallen, kissing up to government policy and throwing RFK Jr. under the bus and this quarterback with him? See, we have to understand that a number of these things, these institutions in the media and other places have been captured. And it's a tough realization. There was a person who realized that and decided, I'm going to run for president back in 1968 because he felt the same way. And that was RFK Sr. Well, we know how that ended, but RFK Sr., he did something incredible with that election, which is he brought people together in post his brother's assassination. And he was getting past the resistance of the whole thing. And he forced LBJ not to run for a second term, which is remarkable. But, those forces that were gathered there to stop RFK Jr. have grown dramatically in our society since then. So it raises the question about what kind of a society we can have going into this 2024 election without dealing with the fact that, our own leaders have been killed. And especially in the case of John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, and that those records are still held by the killers. These are the things we're going to have to address if we want to get anywhere going forward in relation to the political situation, in relation to the UFO file, and as a society. As far out as it seems, those are the things that are going to make the difference in 2024. And the presidential election is going to be important after all. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's been fantastic to be with you here for this special report tonight. And we're going to take your last question from Miss Olivia.
Okay, it is from Paul Leftwick. Bob Dean says, Blue Book unimportant, but it showed where all the money went.
Well, we got a lot from Dean. And that's why I say that Project Camelot produced a couple of good things, even though there were a lot of hoaxsters that came through that as well. But the Bob Dean information, I think we learned a great deal. And, I can see his point. But he was an interesting voice, I think, in all of this. And we can learn a great deal from that. I wish that we had a lot of people with stature in the UFO field. I think it's minnowed out in that most of the people that are involved are largely opportunistic. So I think there's a possibility for building a dramatically more, robust and informed and insightful and truthful group around the independent media, and the UFO files should be a big part of that. And so should the deep state research. Wow. Everyone, it's been so great to be here with you. And we're going to be back with you next week. We'll do a couple of shout outs here.
Hey, I've got a bunch of people to thank.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Okay. All right.
So
super chatters. Gillenjoy R, Rosterman the Seer, Harvardian, Tricky Vicky, Bobo the Clown, W.C. Ray, Izzy the Great, Dorian Hewitt, N plus Fold, Norman Smith, Volcanelli, The Buddhas of Boston Sports, Erica Swenson Elliott, Ghost Malone, Bob Bindert, Terry Doherty, Jonathan, a cult fan, Jay Parsons, Undestroyer, Eurythmia's Fun, Jennifer Walters, Johnny Ricardo Bown, and Carol Linda Gonzalez. Thank you so much for your generous super chats.
Unbelievable. Wow, we really appreciate it. And for all your support, it's just incredible. And it makes all the difference for everything we're doing here. And also to our subscribers, thank you, because with that support, you really make the big difference. We will be back with you next week. There's a two-parter coming up. If they try to arrest President Trump between now and then certainly we'll get on it immediately, and you'll have a special report. I have been working on something in relation to Trump, and so I don't know how that's going to play out. I'll probably present it after the two-parter, but if Trump comes up next week, boy, we know we're going to be in some real interesting territory there. I'll do a couple of shout outs here. Jonathan Fries, it's great to see you. DJ and Olivia 2024. Look at that. Olivia's great in politics. She knows a lot, a heck of a lot. They will arrest. Yes. Holy smoke. Daniel's most excellent. Thank you. Excellent audience tonight and great questions, Miss Olivia. Give me some of that.
Thank you.
What else have you got out there? Go ahead.
What, you want another question?
Sure.
Sacred Forest, do you think DeSantis' statements about no CBDC in Florida will make other blue states embrace CBDC more in reaction? But it's already kind of a foregone conclusion that they're going
to. I mean, speaking straight up just about that, I liked DeSantis and what he had to say about that. And we need states to completely disown this notion of the central bank digital currency. No. Thank you, Olivia. First time here, Seeker of Truth. Thank you for being here, Seeker of Truth. Havardian, what does he have to say? 9 million protesters in France. Wow. Vive la France. Huh? Amazing.
They're showing the way.
Gypsy Moon, Friday Night Lights. Not the truth. Najat, thank you, Najat. It's great to see you. I know Kate's out there. It's great to see you. Scarlet Fire. Excellent. Imagine the world you want, feel it, see it, never lose focus. I like that one. Excellent. You got the right idea. You got the right one, baby. Let's see. Undestroyer. Mr. Wolf. Wolf is out there. Thank you for being here with us. Dutch farmers showing the way. Absolutely. No question about it. They're not gonna take it. Friday night 3-hour tour. I came in with the idea of doing a short show tonight, but this is the way it goes. Modwiz, noble people are not welcome in politics. Well, isn't that the truth? But there are some strange exceptions that we see, and they harangue the entire system. It happens. Somehow it happens. I don't know how. Thanks again. Thank you, Bo. Ghost Machine, be kind. Boy, is that necessary. Whew. Be civil. My Lord. Not like Ruben Galileo. Victory, no surrender. Yes, no surrender. There's no reason for any surrender. And don't surrender the UFO file either to the Central Intelligence Agency. No way. Let's see here. Friday nights. Fantastic. Short show turned long. Exactly. That's the way it goes around here at the Ideas Room. I just can't stop. Unbelievable. But I'm not going to have a timer or any craziness like that. Okay. Sovereign. Yes.
Oh, isn't that a song? Fascinating rhythm. Just can't stop.
Oh, it's great. May the good Lord shine a light. Yes. Boy, do we need that. My goodness. Unbelievable. Whew. Vigilant Blade. Great job. Thank you. Shelley. Thank you. Thank you, DJ. Corey Anderson. Wow. Great crowd out there tonight. Unbelievable. And pray for Dr. Farrell's. Poor typing fingers. Yeah. Was Farrell in here tonight?
I did not see him.
I got to talk to him. Great show. Jen Pasvant. Hey, you made it. I think you made some comment earlier. You had big plans. But thank you for being here. Golden Girl. Blessings. All the police joined the protesters in France. Yeah. Wow. Isn't that quite a happening? My goodness. You can feel it. You can actually feel the kind of aftermath of that. Just incredible. Well, let's say the French are leading the way. Pumphrey, Danielle, Dork, Jorgensen, Esther Taylor. Wow. Fantastic crew out there tonight. What do you got there?
People were funny tonight.
Yeah, there was a lot of comedy in the end. DJ, did you watch my UFO footage? You know, it depends. It depends. But if you sent it to admin@darkjournalist.com, if you linked it there, I don't know if you can actually send a video there. It might be kind of big, but if you link it, if you put it up on like a video site and send it over, Red Rover, I'll take a look at it. Thank you very much. Danielle Jorgensen, Just Rost, Corky Goss. What else? Daniel Foster. Yeah. Wolfgang. Corey Anderson. Excellent crew tonight. We will see you all next week with a special two-parter, maybe a Trump arrest special if they're stupid enough to do that. I hope they're not, but we're going to be right on top of that situation. And thank you so much for being with us here tonight. We look forward to seeing you. And remember, it says end broadcast, but after all, you know, Miss Olivia.
I'm sorry. You know what? I wanted to just add something.
Yeah.
You know, the French really, we know this, they kind of go crazy on weekends. It's going to be a big weekend there. And if we could take a little time this over the weekend to send them love and energy and support and a vision of the police. I know the firefighters are also working with the people, and something very big could go down this weekend. It could be very beautiful or it could be very dark. So let's just send them light and love and support and, you know, freedom, just freedom vibes, you know, the best we can, because they may be showing everybody else the way. They're at the vanguard here.
Absolutely. Give peace a chance. No question about it. We will see you all next week and have a fantastic weekend. And we hope for the very best for people in France, in Ukraine, in Russia, and the whole continent of North America and around the globe. It's great to have so many of you here, and we'll see you all next week. It says end broadcast, but after all, we know it never really ends. Miss Olivia, and bravo, bravissimo.
Thank you.
Nicely done. Ghost Malone. Excellent. Have a great night, everyone.
Okay. God bless everybody.